Okay, thank you, Mr. Kazım. Now we move to item number 2. Welcome and good evening, councillors and members of the public. First of all, I would like to say that yesterday was the sad day of Holocaust Memorial Day, which we should never forget or let anyone forget that terrible incident on human history. Our hearts were with those who lost their lives as well as their loved ones. The Nazi persecution in the genocides that have occurred in the war since the end of the Second War, we should never, even though the time is past, we should always feel with them and also make sure that civil service centers always burns bright to remember the loss of the lives. So we light in the darkness to less forget them. Enfield Council hosted quite a lot of events lately. Due to the pandemic, most of the officers cannot work under normal circumstances, but we have to make sure the work is done and the community is served and the jobs are fulfilled. The resident needs the services, and we try to support as many small businesses as well as elderly people and vulnerable people on their health issues. We are having quite a lot of increased number of incidents and the infected amount of people, and our National Health Service are coping quite well under these difficult circumstances. Therefore, I would like to thank those who have risked their lives to make sure the residents are getting, the ill people and affected people are getting the treatment and the service they need. I thank all the nurses, health workers and doctors for their wonderful services. We have lost 2 previous councillors who have provided quite good services while they were in office, and I would like to ask if any member of the members would like to say a few words on loss of Councillor Andrew Stafford first, and then we will do the same for Jane Buckland. Councillor Çalışkan, would you like to say quite a few words?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I was, of course, incredibly sad to learn the news that Andrew Stafford had passed away earlier this month. As many will know, Andrew served as a councillor and a cabinet member at Enfield Council for a number of years. A dedicated Labour man and a passionate trade unionist, Andrew was well known and liked by residents and our Edmonton Labour Party members. He and Councillor Bond often enjoyed having a pint in the pub, and I like to think that somewhere perhaps they're enjoying a drink together this evening. Mr. Mayor, I know others will want to speak and pay their tributes, but on behalf of Enfield Labour Group, let me send my condolences to Andrew's wife, Teresa, and his family.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban?
Andrew Stafford was committed to the people of Edmonton. He served for many years representing Edmonton Green Ward. I know from speaking to him in the Jolly Butchers, one of his greatest times in politics was being part of the 1997 Labour election campaign. Andrew was a committed Brexiteer, and he delivered leaflets for Vote Leave. As Councillor Çalışkan said, he was a committed unionist, not just a trade unionist, but he believed very passionately about that. But he was also committed to the United Kingdom. My thoughts go to Teresa and their family at this really sad time.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too was very shocked and saddened to hear of Andrew's untimely passing, and just months after the death of another veteran of Enfield Labour Group, Chris Bond. I'd known Andrew since 1990s when I was first elected, and always found him to be a very decent and honourable and very principled man. He was extremely supportive and always happy to offer help and advice, and he could always be found in his office, indeed at the Jolly Butchers. He was unassuming, and I found he was always rather jovial by nature, but he had a very sharp and discerning intellect, and served for many years, as we know, as Cabinet Member for Finance. He was very much an old-fashioned traditional Labour and well regarded and respected. He was a councillor for Edmonton Green, and he served residents with distinction for many years, and he's very much an activist for Edmonton Labour, serving as agent to both Andy Love and then Kate Ossama. Indeed, he was heroic too, nonchalantly fending off a knife attacker with his briefcase whilst out electioneering for the 2001 general election. That was Andrew. I will be deeply missed. I'm very sorry to hear, as I say, and my thoughts go to his widow, Teresa, and family. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I too would like to say a few words about Councillor Andrew Stafford. And in that, I want to cover a few things. He clearly is a loss to the Labour Party. As colleagues have said, he was an activist, a councillor and a party agent, and he truly was a Labour man. He's a loss to the community. First elected in St Mark's in 1994, Latimer in 98, and he served Edmonton Green from 2002 to 2018. A diligent caseworker who helped countless residents, and I recall on many occasions in the Labour Group office, Andrew either speaking to officers on the phone or speaking to residents about issues that he wanted to solve for them. He will be missed. He's a loss to the Edmonton environment. He was a key person in the Edmonton Partnership Initiative, which regenerated the Edmonton Green area in the early 90s. And later, the new laying of the North Mall was a testimony to his continued interest in the green. The clock that stands on the green area near the railway line, again Andrew, and the refurbishment of Green Towers Community Centre, a loss to the Edmonton environment, and a loss to decision making. 10 years in the Cabinet for corporate services, finance, HR and facilities. If I could refer to just a few of the areas he's involved in and made achievements in. The introduction of the London Living Wage into the borough, the first chair of Housing Gateway, finance lead on the purchase of land and Meridian Water, finance lead on a balanced budget in the years of the government's austerity and the cuts that the council faced, and the creation of the first UK welfare benefit hub when universal credit was introduced. Agile working in the council through space rationalisation and commercial letting of civic centre space, and tackling discriminatory practices in construction with Unite. But also, and perhaps more importantly, the loss of a colleague, friend and a person. An ex-senior officer recalled to me his kindness to staff, his joviality, his mischievous side and his clarity of thought. And I remember his ability to give me tips on horse racing. All of us are truly rounded people, and Andrew was. But to me, I will remember him as someone who was considerate, conscientious and compassionate. And my condolences also to Teresa and family at this difficult time. Andrew, rest in peace, and know that through your contribution, you are recognised and what you've done is valued.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giorgio?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Let me begin by offering my condolences to Andrew Stafford's wife, Teresa, and his family at this time. Andrew and I had a very public incident that was regrettable, but out of that came a relationship of mutual respect and moments that have made me into a better politician. Andrew and I could have spent the rest of our time resenting each other, but did we? No. And although, having said that, he did take me down at OSC once, which put me off going back there again for a while, which I'm sure my colleagues on the other side will appreciate. We went from that regrettable moment to sitting in the members' room and in the Jolly Butchers talking honestly about the future of the country and our personal lives. I did learn a lot from Andrew, and these are lessons I will remember for the rest of my own political career. Andrew was always generous with his time and was never politically tribal with me. He was very much a Labour man, but not blinded by dogma. I will miss him as a friend, not just because of his wisdom, but because he taught me that no matter what, we must always put the past behind us and never let someone's politics determine how we treat them. We could all learn from Andrew's example. And once we step out of full council or any political arena, remember that we are all individuals that can admire, respect, love each other, despite the way we vote. I personally miss Andrew a lot, and may God bless his soul, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Needs.
Thank you, Chair. I was really saddened to hear that Andrew had passed. I first met him a few years ago whilst he was Cabinet Member for Finance. I'll never forget. I was absolutely terrified of meeting him. I don't know why, because within 2 minutes of meeting him, he was just so lovely. Andrew was both a gentleman as well as a gentleman. He was passionate about Enfield, especially Edmonton and the Eastern Corridor. He had a great sense of humour, and you always knew where you stood with him. His passing is another great loss for Enfield, and he'll always be remembered, not just by us, but by many. I really wish to express my sincerest condolences to his wife, to his family, and to his other friends. May he rest in eternal peace.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Anelou. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I am deeply, deeply saddened when I heard about Andrew passing on. I first met Andrew in 1997 when I became a very active member of the Labour Party. And I exceptionally found him a very, very approachable person. I would say that Andrew took me under his wing and became my mentor. And he is the engine of my selection and the election in 2002 as a councillor. I call him my mentor. And whatever it is at any time, I would go to Andrew because he's got a listening ear and very approachable. Edmonton is Andrew's, whatever is Andrew's interest, whatever is happening in Edmonton, Andrew is interested. And the regeneration of Edmonton is his mission. And I can say that he achieved it. And I'm no doubt that he's happy wherever he is. It's a great loss to Edmonton, to his friends and family. And my sincerest condolences goes to Teresa and all the family. They are my neighbor, and I can never forget because I always pass in front of their house, and it saddens me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor E. Erbil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Andrew was a dedicated councillor and role model to many of us. He represented the best of us. He supported many people in their time of need. Even to this day, residents often mention his name and work. He went above and beyond to help the people he represented. He gave us the confidence to say that we were from the Labour Party when we knocked on Edmonton's doors. Personally, he was my councillor growing up in Edmonton Green. Andrew actively worked to make the Green the best ward to grow up in. He actively campaigned for youth football clubs, including my own, in Pims Park. He was dedicated to protecting funding and resources to allow the Football League to survive. I was one of the many young people to benefit from Andrew's great work. Mr. Mayor, Andrew was really an outstanding person and an even better councillor. As Edmonton Green councillors, we are proud to walk in his footsteps. My deepest condolences go to his wife, Teresa, and his family. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Neville?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I too was very shocked to hear of Andrew's passing. I've known Andrew, of course, for the whole of the time that he was on council, and I particularly remember Doug mentioned the Edmonton Partnership. Just after Labour came into power in 1994. Shortly after that, I became leader of the Conservative group, and I worked very closely with Andrew on the Edmonton Partnership project. And I think that we would all agree, whatever our political views, I mean, prior to the Edmonton project, Edmonton Green was pretty well not fit for purpose. And what we've got now, maybe still some work to be done, but my goodness, what an amazing transformation from those days pre-1994. I think, Mr. Mayor, that what I remember about Andrew also is, much as other colleagues have mentioned, we could always talk to him and talk to each other. I met him in the street many times, and we'd stop and have a chat. If I was in the civic centre and he was too, and we may not have been doing any business, but just being there for other purposes, always stop and have a chat. A most friendly guy, very decent man. Alex referred to that little incident that we have. Well, these things happen in politics, and the important thing, as Alex says, is that you should never take all these things personally. Frankly, people who do take them personally, in my book, shouldn't be in politics at all, because it's not about that sort of thing. Political divide is about democracy and the expression of a view genuinely held. It's not about holding personal grudges against people and being tribal. And I'm afraid I have no patience with people who are. Andrew was not like that. And I've never been like that, so far as I'm aware. I'm sure someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but it's never been my way of doing politics, and I think that you're better for it in the long run. Andrew was very good representative of the Labour Party, a very good representative of his ward, and again, condolences to Teresa. May rest in peace.
Thank you, Councillor. Please, can I ask for tribute to Jane Buckland? Councillor Rai?
Thank you, Your Worship. Jane Buckland served as a councillor for the Labour Party for several terms and was Mayor of the Borough in the year 2010-11. She lived in Enfield since the very early 1960s, attended Bushell Park Junior School and Edmonton County Secondary School. She worked after completing her higher education as a fashion designer in the West End and later retrained and became a teacher. During her mayoral year, she was particularly keen to support the arts in the borough, and I got to know her as a constituent of mine in Townwood, as indeed are a number of other Labour councillors. Jane was a great protector of the environment and green spaces and trees. Some years ago, I attended a friend's wedding in Turkey, which lasted for several days. And I discovered that Jane was also on the guest list. And there is an incriminating photograph of the pair of us dancing at this wedding. And I have to say, I give her every credit for that, because dancing is clearly not a forte of mine. Jane was very good company. And after she left the council, she did in fact change parties and join the Conservative Party. And she maintained her interest and commitment in the London Borough of Enfield, and I think particularly of her daughter and her extended family, and they have our condolences and thanks for her service to Enfield. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other member who would like to say their tributes to any of the two councillors passed away? Okay. I would like to hold a minute silence on both councillors passing away.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just speak? It's Councillor Lepage.
Hi, Lepage, Councillor Lepage.
Quite a few of us have only just heard about Jane passing. So we were hoping that we could speak at the next meeting to pay our tributes to Jane.
Definitely, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you for that.
So, a minute silence, please. Thank you, councillors. My condolences also to Teresa and Jane Buckland's family. May their soul rest in peace. I would like to invite young mayors and deputy mayors if they would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone at Enfield Council, and I was very lucky to be blessed with such an amazing opportunity to be the young mayor. I don't know if there's going to be another full council meeting. I hope there is, but I would just like to say thank you to everyone that has helped me and has given me this brilliant opportunity to work with you all. I'm here just to quickly provide a small update on the work I've been doing with the council. So I've been working with the Met Police of Enfield, making an educational booklet for young people all across Enfield to educate them on their rights and responsibilities, as well as the role and responsibility of a police officer. I've had several meetings with the Met Police, and we've been working very close together. And we both feel that this booklet is to better the relationship with the police and the young people of Enfield. And now I am starting to work with the council and the Met Police to design and create the document to hopefully send it out to schools before May. I have also been working with members across the council on a new mental health project that we are all very passionate about. The project will raise awareness of youth mental health and emotional well-being. I think this is a really important project, not just for young people, but also for everyone in Enfield right now. After everything that's going on, we all need some help, and we all need some time to regroup. And this is to especially help the young people going through a lot of stress right now in Enfield. So that's my update from me, and thank you everyone once again.
Thank you. Moving to item 3, can I ask for a member to move approval of the minutes from the council meeting held on 18th November 2020?
Mr. Mayor, I move the minutes.
Are these minutes seconded?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, they're seconded.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All three group whips have indicated they will be supporting the minutes. So unless any member suggests that that is not their individual view, the minutes are unanimously approved.
Thank you. Please, can I have any apologies for lateness or absence from the group whips?
Mr Mayor, I have apologies from Councillor Lee David Sanders.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I have apologies for absence from Councillor Caracas and Councillor Brett, and apologies for lateness from Councillor Akpinar.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah. Mr Mayor, I have apologies from Councillor Derek Levy, who's poorly, and I will be acting as whip this evening for the Community First. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope he recovers soon. Declaration of interest. If members have any declarations of interest, please indicate now. Jeremy Chambers will make a short statement in relation to the council tax reports.
Thank you again, Mr Mayor. In accordance with guidance from the Department for Communities and Local Government, there is no requirement for members to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest in relation to items 9 and 10 on the agenda. The exception to this being any councillor who is 2 or more months in arrears on their council tax, in which case they will need to declare this and not take part in the vote. I can confirm that as at the start of the meeting, there are no councillors in arrears of 2 months or more.
Thank you, Jeremy. Opposition business. We now move to item 6, opposition business, low traffic neighborhood. I invite the main opposition group to open the debate. As a reminder, you have a maximum of 10 minutes for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening to everyone.
Thank you.
The opposition puts forward this paper tonight because of the huge impact the low traffic neighbourhoods have had on our borough. This Labour Council is lurching unsteadily from one disaster to the next, from unwanted fortnightly waste collections turning Enfield into a huge fly tip, to the inept implementation of the LTN schemes with no proper consultation, no proper engagement, and without the support from residents. Residents are loudly against the LTNs, but their views are ignored. People living on the roads bordering the LTNs were denied the opportunity to comment, despite suffering the obvious blights imposed by the scheme. The flawed consultation included the council's failure to provide readily available paper copies of the consultation. The digital consultation excludes the weakest and the most vulnerable. The old and the disabled and those with reduced income have no digital access and are being denied a voice. Congestion has overwhelmed Enfield with traffic displacement forced onto the main arteries of the Enfield Road network, such as Bourne Hill, leading up to Southgate Circus, Alderman's Hill, Green Lanes and Cannon Hill. Despite the gridlock, the council has been careful not to measure traffic fumes on these roads with pollution monitoring. They know what it would show. Roads are now too dangerous to cross and people are less inclined to walk. The increased pollution and increased travel times and consequently delays to bus journeys and emergency services is maximising the very matters that LTNs were supposed to prevent. Enfield Dispatch quoted the London Ambulance. Changes to road layouts, traffic management schemes and road closures all have the potential to impede our response to the most critically ill people and could delay life-saving treatments. Pharmacies struggle to deliver medicines to the vulnerable, and this has a cost to the viability of the business and to residents reliant on prompt delivery of medicines. Local carers no longer have the option of a vehicle providing a lifeline. The Cabinet members should have ensured but failed to organise any risk assessment for local business. A local resident surveyed over 50 businesses that have lost trade. These schemes will destroy businesses as trade and customers avoid the area. Local estate agents confirm a property slump is being created. Purchasers are withdrawing house purchase sales due to the gridlock traffic. The reality is the council uses LTNs as a golden goose. Up to the 13th of January, over 1.25 million was extorted from residents in paid camera fines within the LTN area. That's over 34,000 tickets issued. This is the abandonment of ordinary working families, businesses, key workers, the elderly, and those with mobility and health issues. Women naturally feel unsafe walking along closed roads with no passing traffic, which in turn denies them equality. Across London, disappointed residents groups are challenging councils in courts over the perceived and actual unlawfulness of councils like this one, imposing their own socialist agenda under the guise of environmental care. There's no evidence that LTNs reduce traffic. However, there is enormous evidence that LTNs push traffic onto the surrounding roads like they have done in Walthamstow, where traffic volumes on surrounding roads have experienced an increase of 15% since the LTN was introduced. This increase was one of the highest of all London boroughs and higher than the London average. The social injustice created is clear, with traffic and traffic fumes being pushed onto the poorer areas in the borough. These schemes are also having a terrible impact on people's mental health. People have contacted me in tears as they find it difficult to get to work on time. Residents talk about crawling in traffic trying to get to work. How can this Labour Council claim to care about climate change when its own vehicles on instruction are parked with the engine idling hour after hour every day, pumping toxic fumes into the atmosphere? The effect of the council's logic and application is to create more pollution in their crusade to reduce pollution. At the same time, these LTN schemes are punishing owners of electric vehicles. It's a sad and lamentable fact that Enfield, in telling the world it supports green initiatives by introducing only 250 electric charging points, unlike Conservative-run Wandsworth, who have introduced 590 with another 300 on the way. If this council is serious about promoting healthy and active ways to travel, where are your bike hire schemes? Where are your extra pedestrian crossings? Concentrate on fixing the uneven paving stones. There's a distinct lack of alternative travel options. At a time when people are hesitant to use public transport due to the pandemic, the car is a safe option. Some forms of public transport are simply inaccessible to the disabled people, and longer car journeys can trigger impairments that cause more pain and discomfort. Where are the equality impact assessments? We have over 10,500 blue badge holders in Enfield, and according to Age UK, the percentage of people over 65 in Enfield is twice as high as many neighbouring boroughs. These people were never contacted regarding the LTNs, even though they have been severely impacted, and they feel a great injustice served upon them. This blatant discrimination has been cruelly thrust their way by the Labour Council that has not considered the devastating impact on their everyday lives. This was clearly highlighted by Justice Lang in the High Court hearing considering similar issues. Lang criticised the road closures brought in during a pandemic without consultation and criticised the decision-making process as seriously flawed. Justice Lang also mentioned the severe consequences for those who cannot walk, cycle or use public transport, and that the needs of people with protected characteristics, including the elderly or disabled, were not considered. In the Enfield Independent, Councillor Barnes said the trial scheme would only be made permanent, and I quote, if it improves the situation for local people and works for local business. Sadly, I feel this Labour Council has found a nice little earner to buy itself out of its financial mess. Now, since these LTN schemes have proved beyond any doubt to be a complete failure on a spectacular level, the Council should admit its failures and abandon the schemes. What we have is a council that denies democracy and transparency, and we will fight to remove these LTNs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I now invite the majority group to respond. Again, you have 10 minutes, Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I hope you're well. I hope your family are well. Well, it's disappointing, although not unexpected, Mr. Mayor, that the opposition, sensing that they may gain a few votes, are choosing to champion an unsustainable, destructive status quo. We're back in the twilight zone, Mr. Mayor. In the last opposition business, you may remember the shape-shifting Enfield Tories argued to loosen their own government's COVID restrictions. Restrictions we now realise weren't strong enough as we tragically pass 100,000 deaths. Now they're opposing their own government's policy to fight climate change, which will lead to many times that figure, and in the process turning LTNs into a political football. The Conservative government's recent 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution says, and I quote, "We will create more low traffic neighbourhoods to stop rat running and allow people to walk and cycle." Let's get one thing on the record, Mr. Mayor. The main beneficiaries of low traffic neighbourhoods are all residents of the borough, but in particular our children and young people. But to believe in those benefits, you must first understand and accept we have a crisis on our hands. In the last 12 years, the number of miles driven on Enfield's roads every year has increased by over 300 million miles. There are 120,000 cars registered in our borough, with around 20,000 more expected in the next 20 years. This growth is completely unsustainable. And this doesn't include the cars rat running through our residential streets between the North Circular and the M25, or the Hertfordshire commuters who see our borough as a huge car park and complete their journeys on the underground. A third of all car journeys are just over a mile. That's a 15-minute walk for those who are able. And the largest proportion of car journeys are for leisure. As a society, we see cars as an expression of our personal freedom, but we have to change our thinking and see that our future must lie in cleaner air and a stable climate. I admit it's a challenge for all of us, but one that we must meet head on for the sake of future generations. LTNs aren't new. They're designed to encourage drivers to walk or cycle, to carry out journeys at off-peak times, use public transport when safe, combine trips, car share, or just not make the journey at all. Of course, residents with some types of disabilities need to drive, and we hope these measures will leave the roads less congested for them in the future. The behavioural change we want to see will have a hugely positive effect. Childhood obesity is a huge issue, hardly surprising when 25% of the morning traffic in London can be contributed to the school run. Low traffic neighbourhoods can provide safe corridors to get to schools, particularly combined with a school street. These safe corridors don't just benefit residents of the LTN, they exist for residents of the entire surrounding area. The combination of our Fox Lane LTN and school street has seen the number of children travelling by car to one school reduced by almost 20% in a year. I fully understand that adapting to LTNs isn't easy, and I know they've led to big changes in routine for some people. Significant modal shifts take time, and Enfield residents aren't alone. The government's funded over 100 LTNs across London. These are tough decisions, and doing the right thing requires visualising a better future, and for a responsible council to deliver this long-term positive change. The opposition's report is full of misinformation. It states that low traffic neighbourhoods are residential roads where motor traffic is closed off completely. This is totally untrue. In both of our low traffic neighbourhoods, you can reach every single house by car, park on those roads, walk or cycle to wherever you wish. But what you can no longer do is rat run across residential streets to shave a few minutes off your journey. Removing these rat runners creates safer streets, Mr. Mayor. Evidence shows that a driver on a residential street is twice as likely to kill a child walking and 3 times more likely to kill a child on a bike than if they'd stayed on the main road. Our residential streets have more pedestrians, fewer crossings and more blind corners. In the last 10 years, we've seen an explosion of cars crisscrossing Enfield's residential neighbourhoods, guided by sat-nav phone apps. In the Fox Lane estate, one junction saw 25,000 vehicles a week, and we clock cars travelling at 60, 70 and even on one occasion 80 miles per hour. This is certain death for a child. Another piece of fiction in the opposition business report states that the Fox Lane and Bowes LTNs were implemented this summer without consulting residents. This demonstrates the utter confusion of the opposition concerning the two schemes, so I'm going to clarify, Mr. Mayor. The Fox Lane LTN began way back in November 2019, when the first LTN design was shared with ward councillors before a public exhibition with 400 residents. This was followed by a 6-week engagement which saw 1,500 pieces of feedback, and a completely new design was our response to that feedback. This went back to ward councillors. We produced an online seminar due to COVID and installed the LTN in October 2020, 11 months later. There's now a live consultation. I think it's also worth pointing out, Mr. Mayor, that the opposition didn't call in the decision to proceed with the Fox Lane LTN for further scrutiny. And as recently as last summer, Councillor Hockney was tweeting about road safety and support for LTNs. The origins of the Bowes LTN differ from Fox Lane. It's an area plagued by traffic problems due to the North Circular. We saw years of campaigning for an LTN, lobbying from Bowes councillors, several petitions, including one presented in Parliament, and a perception survey. The Bowes LTN was entirely paid for by this opposition's Conservative government, which imposed a punishing 8-week implementation. If we hadn't met this timescale, the government would have reclaimed the funds and penalised us in the next round, which has recently awarded us 1.5 million for further active travel schemes. There's a live consultation in Bowes, and before Christmas we met with 5 different groups in the area, and I thank them. And after facing some GDPR issues, we'll soon contact blue badge holders individually in both schemes to gather their feedback. Mr. Mayor, one concern of all groups and many residents is access by the emergency services, an important issue, and I welcome the opportunity to provide reassurance. We had to consult all emergency services by law on the LTN designs. And throughout the trial period, the council regularly seeks feedback from the ambulance service, the fire brigade and the police. A responsible opposition would heed this reassurance and cease their spread of misinformation, particularly when the Chief Operating Officer of the London Ambulance Service publicly stated, "We're not aware of any LTNs that have led to any patient safety concerns or significant delays." As part of the design process, unhindered routes were agreed with the ambulance service in particular. These routes are enforced by CCTV cameras, which, as you've just heard, the opposition continues to attack. I'd prefer the cameras issue no fines whatsoever, Mr. Mayor, meaning drivers aren't putting pedestrians and cyclists in danger by ignoring road signs. And if the opposition thinks the signage isn't clear, I'd suggest contacting their Conservative Secretary of State, because they all conform to his regulations. If drivers don't recognise the signs, then please consult the Highway Code. Mr. Mayor, one of the most frequent arguments I've heard is that LTNs cause congestion. Let me correct that. The sheer amount of cars on our roads causes congestion. I'm also told that the schemes push cars onto main roads. Well, that's exactly the point of LTNs, sending dangerous through traffic back to its proper place, roads designed for high volume, allowing our residential streets, where 90% of residents live, to become safer. But I recognise that 10% of residents live on these main roads, and that's why we hope to see traffic evaporation and a reduction of vehicles. But we'll still do everything possible to improve air quality and traffic levels on those roads as well. We must campaign for more cycle lanes, pushing traffic further from homes, introduce more trees as green buffers, provide more pedestrian improvements, and we need further investment in public transport. And we have to lobby the Department for Transport to improve road layouts and roundabouts, which were never designed for this vast amount of vehicles. Electric vehicles will also help pollution, but not congestion, Mr. Mayor. And today, all green benefits have been cancelled out.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have been cancelled out by the unstoppable rise of high-emitting SUVs. But for those residents with some types of disabilities who have to drive, we're trialling lamppost charging very soon. Some argue the single most effective relief for main roads will be road user charging by the mile, and this is being considered by the Chancellor. It'd be useful to know tonight if Conservative members would support Rishi Sunak on this, or whether they'll oppose yet another one of their government policies. A massive 39% of Enfield's greenhouse gas emissions are from our roads, and fighting climate change while making our streets safer should not be party political. There could be real cross-party effort to genuinely improve our borough and reap the rewards of funding for LTN school streets and cycle lanes. The opposition don't need to move further to the outer fringes of their party.
Last 10 seconds, Councillor.
They don't need to repeat the same mistakes of 2017 when they opposed the cycle lanes. They can join us now in recognising that residents care deeply about climate change and their children's future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone from the minor opposition who wishes to speak? You have 3 minutes. Councillor Lemonades?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, well, according to Councillor Barnes, there isn't a problem. Look, there's not a councillor in this room that's not worried about traffic, pollution and climate change. Personally, I don't believe that LTNs are the answer. I've seen no empirical evidence to suggest that traffic evaporates. Sorry, my speech has gone dead. Right, I've seen no empirical evidence to suggest that traffic evaporates. I think there are effective ways of reducing traffic and pollution, but they probably require central government intervention. The issue that Councillor Barnes is missing is it's not whether you believe LTNs are correct or not. It's an issue of one of democracy. I'm not one for divisive government. I believe in dialogue. It's not good enough to simply impose one's will on people. Even if there is some support for these schemes, forcing people to do things because you believe in them is bad politics. Indeed, the MP for Southgate urged caution with these schemes. And in fact, Councillor Barnes will remember a year ago in a Labour group meeting, I also urged caution. If it was, if it wasn't a problem, we wouldn't be inundated with thousands and thousands of emails complaining. Yes, there are some supports, but most are complaining. As long as there's a substantial number of residents who are against the schemes, we have a duty to discuss and consult before anything is implemented. We did this with cycle lanes. We listened to people, changed our plans where it was practical, and when it was not, we explained why alternatives were not workable. The dialogue process was hard work, but it paid off. We all know that COVID-19 makes communication harder, but technology provides ways around that. Incidentally, we never had as many complaints about cycle lane as we do about LTNs. I've had a lot of emails and verbal communication complaining about these schemes. Some
Last
of them,
minute, Councillor.
Sorry?
1 minute, Councillor.
Some of these emails and verbal communication complain about these schemes. Some of this is personal in nature, and people complain that Councillor Barnes is rude and dismissive and not interested in residents' concerns. Now, you may take the view that Councillor Barnes is rude and dismissive. I just believe he's simply inexperienced, brackets, incompetent, question mark, close bracket. You might recall the article in Squawk Box that said Councillor Barnes failed the selection process for the 2018 local elections. Interesting enough, I've never seen a rebuttal from either Councillor Barnes or indeed Councillor Kaliska. It's surprising that someone who
Councillor, could you speak to the issue, please?
Yes, I am. It goes to the heart of the nature. Yeah. Is it surprising that someone who failed the selection process is showing bad judgment and belligerence with our residents over the LTNs? Thank you.
Time, Councillor. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to do a personal point of explanation.
Jeremy, just 1 second, Councillor.
In terms of the Constitution, I must remind all members that points of personal explanation can only be used when you're addressing something which has previously been said by yourself. As Councillor Kaliskan has yet to speak on this matter, the Constitution does not permit a point of personal explanation at this time.
May I do a point of clarity then, as I was referred to in the councillor's speech?
You can do a point of order, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, let me be clear. I think the comments made by the councillor reflect a nasty and personal attack, and I have actually personally taken legal action against the Sunday Times and other outlets, and won. Outlets who wrote personal racist descriptions. I took legal action and won. So Councillor Lemonides needs to be correct in what he's saying, and I think.
Councillor, you're mute. She's muted. Councillor Jules. Jules.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, you are next. You are in the queue. I can see you. You're next. Thank you. Sorry about it, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, disgusting comments we just heard there, but I'm sure they'll get dealt with. It's incredibly disappointing to see the opposition attack our school street schemes, really, because of course they claim they're not, but school streets are an integral part of our quieter neighbourhood manifesto promise, alongside low traffic neighbourhoods and cycle lanes. They're all connected, and if you attack LTNs, you're attacking our school street schemes as well, because they all work together to make life safer and less polluted for our children and grandchildren in Enfield. Just a reminder that School Street restricts traffic on roads outside schools at pick-up times and drop-off times during the term times of schools, making it safer and easier for children to walk to school, scoot and cycle. This reduces children's exposure to toxic air pollution and encourages walking and cycling. And evidence shows that school streets don't simply displace traffic, reduce it overall. School streets also limit children's exposure to angry parents suffering from road rage as they fight to park wherever they can outside the school. And they're operated by fantastic volunteers using barriers in the hope that these will be replaced by cameras after consultations. And we've got 12 of these trial school street schemes in Enfield, 2 permanent schemes and cameras, and it'd be wonderful if every school in Enfield had an LTN and a school street. And I know that the deputy leader is investigating whether some of the money from camera fines can be used to buy more cameras for school streets. It's estimated that 25% of traffic in the morning rush hour is from the school run. So just imagine if we could take this quarter of all cars off the roads at that time, connecting to a low traffic neighbourhood to a school street scheme, seems like a no-brainer. Reduce danger from traffic, making a safe corridor for children, not just in the LTN, but also the surrounding area to walk to school, cycle or scoot. St Monica's had a camera in full School Street within the Fox Lane low traffic neighbourhood. And as we've heard tonight, this has led to the proportion of children travelling to school reduced by 18 percentage points. The head of St Monica's even wrote a letter to parents at the end of last year about her experience of getting back on her bike to travel along the cycle lanes and through the Fox Lane LTN. She writes of her increased fitness as her cycling journey is reduced from 45 minutes to 30 minutes. She ends her letter by saying, doing little things really well and educating ourselves, we can do things so much for the environment. So while the Tories attract low traffic neighbourhoods, don't be fooled, they're also attacking school streets. Measures put in place by this administration to protect the youngest in this borough. It's shameful that they put politics above the well-being of children, but not really a surprise. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I remind all councillors on any item on the agenda tonight, they are required to speak to the item at hand. And I would also ask all members to be respectful of the technology we're using and not to seek to attempt to mute other councillors when they're speaking. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Lonu?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to make my reasons for frustration clear. Councillor Ian Barnes has displayed excellently the definition of spin to the detriment of residents who feel incredibly let down. This council does not care about pollution, improving air quality or making our lives better. Every day we have idling enforcement vehicles ticketing people going past the barriers to the tune of 1.2 million being generated from this scheme alone. Even the Telegraph called out the council for its disgraceful morals in this situation. It cares only about the potential revenue it can generate from schemes like the LTN to subsidise the misspending elsewhere. Mr. Mayor, the administration applied, designed and implemented the scheme. They didn't have to apply, but they did anyway. It was a choice they took. From the start, this scheme has been an utter failure. The entire closure of roads causing gridlock in the surrounding roads like High Street, Winchmore Hill Road, Chase Side, Bourne Hill, etc. has caused delays and suffering for everyone commuting through Southgate to get to key roads like the A406 and M25. In one case, a carer in between lockdowns 1 and 2 stopped going to a resident within the Lex estate, and I quote, because the increased journey time caused by traffic meant she couldn't juggle appointments. And if we're going to get serious, Mr. Mayor, let's talk about the emergency services. I have a leaked document from the London Ambulance Service which states we are not in favour of road closures. A clear sign of, therefore, by the LAS to not close the roads. But oh no, the council only go and put a camera on the midway and catch out motorists still. Not requested, but done anyway. But most heartbreaking, Mr. Mayor, is the videos of emergency services having not had the keys to access roads which have been put in with removable bollards. Now there are Labour members who work for the NHS and they know every second counts. And this, frankly, negligence could endanger somebody's life. Councillor Ian Barnes clearly has not gone on social media to see the blocking of ambulances. 8,000 petitioners have signed the petitions calling for the removal of Enfield ATNs, compared to just 377 who sought to have their roads closed for their benefit. In addition, consultation is not transparent. This scheme has been pushed at a time of COVID pandemic when car usage has decreased, and therefore the data will be unfairly skewed towards suggesting traffic and air quality has improved, when in reality the timing of the scheme is not a realist situation. Furthermore, I have complained about the poor choice of signage, only to have my officers reject my calls. But the residents that take their PCNs to the adjudicator, the council don't even bother to provide evidence for their cases. Clearly 34,000 fines are hard work for the council to defend. I don't blame them. It's a hard job defending something when you know the signage is poor to create revenue. Hackney, Ealing, Hounslow, Lambeth, Croydon and now Enfield are launching legal challenges. I see their point for the mentioned points that Justice Lang made about the serious flaws of the street space scheme, and I look forward to the 12th of February when the hearing is made. I ask for the council to suspend the rollout of LTNs for the benefit of our borough.
Councillor, thank you. Jeremy?
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. 2 matters have been brought to my attention. The leader of the council has notified me that her point of order was interrupted before being finished. So that's the first point. I think you should invite her to finish her point of order.
Sure.
And secondly, the whip of the Conservative group, Councillor Vince, has requested to move a procedural motion to extend the time for opposition priority business. So I would deal with the matters in that order. The leader's point of order first.
Leader, Councillor, would you carry on with your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm unclear why when somebody felt the need to mute when I was raising a really important point to flag to Councillor Lemonides that his unfounded accusations, which stem from a place of racism, were echoed in a newspaper that I took legal action on and won. I'd remind him of that. I'd also remind him that the way that we address and raise issues in the council chamber, virtual or otherwise, really need to be in a manner that is appropriate, and would ask councillors to stick to the substance of the opposition business.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to move on, Councillor. Yeah, Councillor Anderson? Wins. Okay, Councillor Wins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move a procedural.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can I make a point of personal explanation?
Can I finish mine first, please?
I need to deal with the procedural motion removal first, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move a procedural rule to extend the debate by 15 minutes, bearing in mind the high interest of the public and especially the public listening in on this debate tonight.
I second that.
Is that seconded?
Councillor
Councillor Laban has just seconded it.
Okay. We need to go to the vote because I've got a lot of items to go through. Should we go to the vote, Jeremy?
Yes, Mayor, we have no indication from any of the groups on this procedural motion. So what I would suggest is if the group whips can indicate how they believe their group would vote, and each time check whether the group agrees with that. So I would simply go to Councillor Stewart and ask for her view on the Labour group.
The Labour group will be in agreement, but actually would prefer 30 minutes if Councillor Vince would like to amend her procedural motion.
I'm very happy with that, Your Worship.
Thank you.
And does Councillor Laban agree as the seconder?
Happy to second that, the 30 minutes, and back in Glynis Vince.
Thank you.
Okay. So the Conservative group whip now should indicate whether they support, which is clearly the obvious they do.
We do, sorry, I've got the mic.
Okay.
I was trying to get it on and off, but we do obviously support it.
And finally, Councillor Anderson, on behalf of Community First.
We're in agreement too, thank you.
So there's a unanimous extension of opposition business by 30 minutes to 8:51 p.m. Back to Councillor
Lemonidis. Councillor Lemonidis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification. I made no mention of racism. I had no idea, you know, what Sunday Times and suing people has anything to do with it. I simply referred to an article in Squawk Box, which everyone saw, and I've never seen it being denied by Councillor Barnes and Councillor Gaviscon. That's all I said. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to carry on. Councillor Anderson, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have long opposed the concept of so-called low traffic neighbourhoods, which tackle the symptom and not the underlying cause of traffic. They're a fiction and based on a well-propagated myth, the idea that traffic in surrounding roads simply evaporates and everyone then lives happily ever after. Well, even on the rather selective data available, much drawn from academic papers going back over 20 years. At best, around 11% of traffic may disappear, and even then, it is on the basis of a whole host of supportive measures being in place. However, that means 89% of traffic remains and is simply displaced, and there is no data on the combined impact of multiple LTNs upon an area. Rosamond Kissy Deborah, whose 9-year-old daughter's death from asthma was attributed to air pollution, described LTNs as a slap in the face. In comments that could equally be attributed to the mess created in Bowes and Fox Lane, she said, "What I'm most annoyed about is councillors patronising responses, as if people are stupid. For example, you need to give it time. But not only did they not consult with us when they closed off roads, where did they think the traffic was going to go? Where indeed, Mr. Mayor? On surrounding roads, that's where, which now take additional traffic, increasing congestion and air pollution for those residents. But the irony is, Mr. Mayor, a vast majority of residents, even within LTNs, actually oppose these schemes for complicating their journeys and making their lives intolerable. Supporters of LTNs instead argue that we have 30% more traffic on our roads and something has to be done. Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't really know about you, but I can only drive one car at a time. The reason there is 30% more traffic on our roads is because we're intensifying unaffordable housing developments in our already dense urban districts. London has grown by almost 1 million over the past decade. The head of Transport and Strategy of Planning at TfL herself acknowledged this, stating all those people, even if they're not travelling by car, still have to have their homes serviced and receiving deliveries such as Amazon and Ocado. Let me be clear, roads are for vehicles, not for snowmen, and not for blocking access for the said delivery drivers, and certainly not for delaying or ambulances. It should not be about creating privileged estates at the expense of everybody else, nor for councils to treat decent people as cash cows. Furthermore, there is no electoral mandate in Enfield for the rollout of LTNs. They weren't in the 2018 Labour manifesto. We were for quieter neighbourhoods, traffic calming, 20-mile-per-hour zones and so on. They might want to, the administration might want to link them in with an extension of Cycle Enfield, but they are not. There's something very different. They were not about closing roads. We have to face facts that in Enfield, the car is and will remain a necessity for many people, particularly in the absence of adequate alternatives. Unfortunately, we have a Mayor of London who's consistently refused to commit to an outer London bus review. Worse, as a result of his funding crisis, Khan now intends to slash outer London bus route. Mr. Mayor, as I said before, it's far easier to get to the British Museum by public transport than to Fawlty Hall. Mr. Mayor, LTNs are not the solution and should be removed without delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Çalışkan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over the last few months, I've corresponded and spoken to hundreds of residents about low traffic neighbourhood schemes, and I've listened to passionate views from both sides. I hear the views, I'm sympathetic with them, and I advocate on behalf of residents to see if we can amend the schemes to work for local areas. But Mr. Mayor, I'm also honest with residents about the environmental reasons we are trialling these LTNs, and that they were a clear manifesto promise from this administration. Mr. Mayor, I don't believe politicians should flip-flop on issues. I also don't believe councillors should conduct personal and nasty campaigns or spread untruths like the fabrication in the opposition business and the ridiculous speeches spouted by opposition members this evening. But sadly, that's what we've got and had from members of both political parties, opposition parties in Enfield. Conduct from some councillors has exploited anxieties in our communities, spreading lies, often by pulling in campaign groups from other parts of London, tapping into a growing trend of conspiratorial theorising. This sort of Trumpism approach is whipping up anger and hatred, and it has no place in our borough. And we've seen a perfect example of that this evening. I have to say, Mr. Mayor, I've been heartened, though, to hear more often than not from residents, even those who don't support LTNs, that they have been appalled by the tactics used by some members of the Conservative group and Community First. But we need condemnation from political group leaders too, because councillors, that kind of behaviour is just not normal. So Councillor Laban, Community First, this is your opportunity to call it out, to disassociate yourself with trolls on social media, with the death threats that have been sent to my colleagues, with our council officers and workmen being shouted at. Mr. Mayor, others have already spoken about the benefits of LTNs, and we've also humbly acknowledged that all traffic schemes can be disruptive. But I ask members and residents to remember this key fact, that car usage will increase by 24,000 next 20 years. So the council is taking action to reduce the number of short journeys for the future, so that those who need a car can use a car comfortably. And when thousands of people die prematurely from bad air quality, it's right that the council is doing something about short car journeys, because we know that 40% of the borough's gas emissions are from vehicles. Mr. Mayor, let me end by saying this. Look, delivering long-term positive environmental change requires being more than just a talking shop. After years of hearing residents asking for fewer cars on their residential roads, this council is doing something. Schemes may not be perfect, but I'm glad that we're a council that takes action. We trial.
10 seconds, Councillor.
We don't believe in the do-nothing, dormant approach of the opposition.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban.
The Labour administration chose to bid for the money from the Active Travel Fund. It did not have to. The only reason the Fox Lane and Bowes areas have LTNs is because the Labour administration decided to put them there. The designs of both schemes were created by Enfield Council. So, to the residents listening tonight, your inconvenience, the pollution, the congestion, and the division within our community has been caused by Enfield Council. The designs of both schemes have simply moved traffic on and created congestion on nearby main roads, such as Green Lanes, Alderman's Hill and Cannons Hill. Yet there are no pollution monitors on these roads to assess the impact on air quality for the people who live and work there. The irony is that the administration has declared climate emergency, yet it has designed a scheme that pushes more vehicles onto the A406, one of the most polluted roads in London. A road that manages to be busy during national lockdowns. As you can see from the paper, nitrogen dioxide levels in Bows rose in November. If that was not enough, Councillor Barnes's contribution to improving air quality is to have an enforcement vehicle for the Fox Lane LTN with its engine running for 7 hours a day, helping raise 1.25 million in income. Last week, Mrs. Justice Lang said that TfL sought to take advantage of the pandemic to push through ill thought out schemes on an emergency basis without consultation. In addition, she said, the Mayor had sought to punish the motorist rather than think creatively of ways to encourage pedestrians and cyclists, let alone users of public transport. Most damning of all, Lang believed that the Mayor and TfL intended that these schemes would be permanent once the temporary orders expired.
Last minute, Councillor.
I'm afraid this equally applies to Enfield's Labour Council with the Bows and Fox Lane LTNs. The administration has engaged a lot with those who support the schemes, but have not, in my opinion, paid equal attention to those who don't. The OSC meeting where a petition against the Bows scheme was heard was an embarrassment to this organisation. We cannot ignore the protests and the media coverage over these schemes. In conclusion, these schemes have benefited the few, but detrimentally impacted the many. It is time to do the decent thing for once and take inspiration from the leaders of Wandsworth and Redbridge councils who listened to their residents after outrage. We ask that you simply do the same and agree the recommendations in the paper tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, Councillor Ergin Erbil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, whatever your political views, no one should be attacking councillors, elected representatives or council workers. Colleagues have faced abuse online, threats, and tonight, disgraceful comments from an opposition councillor. This is unacceptable and shameful. Back to the issues of LTNs. The idea of LTNs is simple. By cutting off through traffic in minor residential roads, residents can benefit from a quieter environment, less pollution, reduced danger from traffic, and be more likely to walk or cycle. It should be stressed that the concept of blocking off through traffic to residential streets is a well-established tool of town planners. Many parts of London have benefited from such schemes. Further, the need to protect residential streets from excess traffic has been made more urgent by sat-navs and apps such as Google Maps or Waze, which have encouraged drivers to rat run. Nearly all the growth in traffic over the past decade has been on residential streets, used as shortcuts, often turning quiet roads into busy rat runs. This is unacceptable and detrimental to people's health. Thirdly, LTNs have been shown to have enormous benefits. While we've heard about examples from Wandsworth tonight, let me give you another example, Mr. Mayor. Labour-run Waltham Forest Council introduced a series of schemes supported by money from the Mayor of London in 2016. And as a result, not only have cycling and walking increased dramatically and air pollution reduced dramatically, but life expectancies have risen. This is something we need in Enfield and especially on the eastern part of the borough. Moreover, fears from local shopkeepers that they would lose patronage have proved groundless. In fact, the early schemes have been so successful that parts of the borough where opposition was greatest are now actively seeking to have LTNs implemented. So yes, I would ask residents and residential associations to give it time. Now, I understand the concerns raised by many, but we have received applause and we have received support for LTNs as much as we have received emails which have raised concerns. There is no evidence that the schemes benefit more affluent people over poorer ones. In fact, we need more LTNs in the eastern corridor of the borough to tackle rising air pollution. This has implications far beyond transport. Having less traffic going past your door makes life better in lots of ways, from improving sleep to making for a more friendly neighbourhood. May I remind the opposition councillors that we are in the middle of a climate emergency, so I invite opposition councillors to act responsibly and do the right thing. Support our efforts to tackle air pollution. support our efforts to promote walking and cycling, and most importantly, support our efforts to make Enfield a better place to live.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor De Silva, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The low traffic neighbourhoods that we have in Enfield have been imposed on residents by this Labour Council. These LTNs have prioritised the comfort of a few over the suffering of a many, quite frankly. The poor design of the LTNs have pushed traffic onto surrounding roads, causing misery for anyone living on those roads, or quite frankly, trying to get from A to B. In Enfield, almost all of our roads are residential. There isn't a difference between a side road and a residential road. They all have people living on them. The difference is that people living on main roads, it's well documented, are more likely to have health conditions. In fact, a study by the Royal College showed that children living along main roads are 14% more likely to suffer from stunted lung growth and 10% more likely to suffer from lung cancer. And the primary reason for that is that main roads already have higher levels of pollution. And so what we've done with these LTNs is transferred that excess pollution from the side roads onto the main roads, pumping more and more fumes along roads that really can't handle it and people that shouldn't have to deal with it. The traffic just isn't evaporating. It's not going anywhere. In fact, it really isn't going anywhere. Anyone that's sat in a jam knows it doesn't go anywhere at all. Even in lockdown, it builds up. Instead of fighting for some of our most marginalised and voiceless residents, this council has piled up pollution and congestion along their streets. And when they do complain, these residents that are least likely to complain, when they do raise legitimate concerns, they are completely dismissed. They are characterised as rats. We were all elected councillors to serve the whole community, not just a few. The LTNs divide communities. They are unwanted, they are unnecessary, and quite frankly, they're unsafe. So I'm calling on all councillors tonight to vote to pause these LTNs and have a thorough rethink. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. I think I'm one of the few people at this meeting who doesn't own or drive a car. We gave ours up more than 15 years ago. And as you'd expect, I'm in favour of promoting more active modes of transport. What I'm not in favour of is making it more difficult for people who need to use a car to do so. Traffic calming is one thing. It makes roads safer and it might discourage some people from making unnecessary journeys. But these schemes have just caused traffic displacement. Some roads have less traffic, others have more. It's an us and them policy, dividing communities into those inside the barriers and those outside. The most telling comments I've received, though, have been from residents who recognise that they have benefited, but go on to give evidence for the unfairness of the scheme on their neighbours. And these schemes aren't even reducing pollution. That's the one metric that's been relentlessly banged on about to residents who have had the temerity to complain. When local councillors were finally asked about the Fox Lane plans, and we were not consulted in November 2019, I said I would be in favour of a borough-wide 20-mile-an-hour limit. That would be cheaper and fairer. The money saved could then have been used to improve our footways, which would benefit everyone. If that had been done, the money we were given by the GLA could have been spent, as indeed we were initially told it would be, to make temporary changes to enable safe social distancing on our footways, something that is very much needed. Seeing what's happened since LTNs have been installed has convinced me that a 20-mile limit over the whole borough would be a far better way of achieving the same aims. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chiba.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As chair of the Environment Forum, I'm going to make the environmental case for LTNs. We face an existential threat from climate change. This threat has the capacity to dwarf the current tragedy of the pandemic. We have to look at the big picture on this. We can't just ignore it. A massive 39% of Enfield's greenhouse gas emissions come from our roads. We've pledged to make Enfield carbon neutral by 2040, and the government has pledged this for the whole of the UK by 2050. To meet these targets, we absolutely have to tackle emissions from cars. We know about the Enfield Conservatives' disdain for climate change from debates last year and from their abstentions, but at least their government understands the need for action, which is funding LTNs up and down the EU. Of course, LTNs are only a small part of what needs to be done, and that's why I would like to see this borough full of electric charging points so that people can change to more environmentally friendly modes of travel. But at the moment, our best option is to try and encourage active modes of travel where possible. And so the environmental case for LTNs is totally inarguable as far as I'm concerned. But Mr. Mayor, I have to just tackle two big bits of misinformation in opposition business tonight. The opposition business wrongly states that LTNs are being carried out without consultation. As the opposition must know, this is complete nonsense. In my ward of Bowes, there is currently a consultation being carried out alongside the live trial of the LTN. And I actively encourage all residents to take part in this consultation. Residents' experiences and feedback are absolutely crucial, and they can inform us about possible changes and improvements that are needed. It was feedback from residents that had a big impact on changes in the Fox Lane scheme. And I would always maintain that with any scheme, it's incredibly important to listen to the experience of the people on the ground. That is why we've ended up with trials of LTNs in the first place, from listening to what people wanted.
Last minute.
Another point I must address is that the data about air pollution that's used in opposition business is very misleading. It doesn't compare like with like. It doesn't compare months from one year from months with the previous year. And if this had been done, it would be shown that pollution has decreased if you compare like with like, and that really does need to be addressed. It's early days, we can't jump to conclusions, but at the moment the data seems to indicate that there is a reduction in pollution, which is obviously what we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It will not be surprising to any of you, I think, that reading the volume of emails that we've all received over the last few days shows that there is, yes, some division, but an awful lot of opposition to these schemes. And basically, the opposition stems from the fact that there is no real evidence that these are reducing pollution, nor can they be, when in reality all that's happening is that the pollution is moving to the next street. The reasons for, as I say, are varied, but the common theme, and one which the administration should be alive to, is one of disgust and disillusionment at the lack of genuine consultation. And there is a mode of difference between genuine consultation and the sorts of consultation that we've been talking about. And with respect to Councillor Shiva, it's not an answer to say, well, it's an ongoing consultation when people are being fined at the rate of, we now know the figure of 1.25 million, most of them of whom will be residents. Mr. Mayor, even if it was right to introduce LTNs on this scale, and obviously I don't accept that view, it's irresponsible to do it at the time when the emergency services are working flat out to cope with the pandemic and can ill afford the time to take them to dismantle bollards to gain access to seriously ill patients. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Barnes talks about having consulted. I shall be producing to the monitoring officer any day now emails that I have been leaked to me by the ambulance service that show quite clearly that they did not support these measures. They did not support these measures, I repeat. Officers knew that, but officers reported otherwise, and that's a matter I should be taking up with the monitoring officer for formal action. But Mr. Mayor,
Last minute, Councillor.
what is happening is that voluntary workers are being fined, elderly people coming to care for the elderly, and district nurses catching penalties. Isn't that shameful? More importantly, the government guidance that was issued in May 2020 is not really about climate change at all. It's about addressing measures that respond to the need for social distancing. And particularly, it is said in the guidance, those who have read it will see, it is directed to town centres and high streets for obvious reasons. And this, of course, is what Mrs. Justice Lang found when she considered the matter last week. Next week, in 2 weeks' time, on 15th of February, either she or some other judge will be considering 10 more applications for judicial
Last
review.
10 seconds, Councillor.
And Mr. Mayor, what I say to Councillor Barnes and to Councillor Caliscan is that they would both do well to remember the immortal words of Lord Denning, who was one of the greatest judges of the 20th century.
Councillor.
He said in a 1977 judgment, Mr. Mayor, "Be you ever never so high, the law is above you, and the law will catch you out." Make sure of that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Routine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Cabinet Member for Public Health, I wholeheartedly support LTN trial that encourages more active travel, walking and cycling in Enfield. Encouraging residents out of their cars for short journeys and instead walking or cycling, if they're able to, is essential as we work to improve the health and well-being of our community, particularly amongst our young people where obesity levels are high. Reducing obesity is a priority for Enfield, as outlined in the borough's health and well-being strategy. 61% of adults are classified as overweight or obese, and 41% of all 11-year-olds are now overweight or obese. Childhood obesity leads to increased risk of heart disease, strokes, type 2 diabetes, breast cancer, and osteoarthritis. And physical inactivity is now responsible for 1 in 6 deaths in the UK. Physical activity is associated with reducing the prevalence of long-term conditions by 20 to 40%. Such is the effect of physical activity upon health that it has been calculated that a model shift to level of walking and cycling in the Netherlands would save the NHS 17 billion per year. Evidence clearly shows that the low traffic neighbourhoods are associated with increased level of active travel, and those who cycle as a means of travel are over 4 times more likely to meet physical activity guidelines than those who do not. Achieving model shift towards walking and cycling will also reduce other health damaging effects of motor vehicles, road traffic injuries, air pollution and noise pollution. Our low traffic neighbourhood in Fox Lane and Bowes create an active and safe environment to walk or cycle for residents, both within the LTNS, but also in the surrounding area. And this is just one part of the strategy. Combining LTNS with schools, streets and cycle lanes will have a significant impact on the public health of our children, as we have seen with increased activity at St. Monica's School in the Fox Lane. Even the opposition Conservative government recognise the vital importance. I'm surprised our opposition here in Enfield, they are not supporting this. Our future generation would thank us, because coronavirus has exposed inequalities in health. It would allow people to live longer. So we are moving forward, and we're also listening to the residents for their better health. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Vince has indicated she would like to move a procedural motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that we extend the debate further by another 15 minutes or half an hour, whichever is agreeable.
Is that seconded?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Laban's just second.
Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I would go to the group whips. I will first go to Councillor Stewart on behalf of the Labour Group.
No, we won't be supporting the procedural motion. We've already extended once and we have a lot of other important issues on the agenda to get through tonight. Thank you.
Okay, are there any members of the Labour Group that do not agree with the whip's view? I'll take the silence as agreement. Councillor Vince has indicated the Conservative group's view. Are there any members of the Conservative group that do not wish to extend? Again, I'll take the silence as agreement with the group whip's position. And finally, Councillor Anderson, could I ask you to confirm the Community First group's position?
Well, it's a bit academic, but we would agree to extend it.
And is that the decision of all the Community First group?
It is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that basis, Mr. Mayor, the procedural motion fails and the time will end for this matter at 8:51.
Thank you, Jeremy. We carry on. Councillor Rawlings.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a bit of time to get onto the screen. Most of us would agree that the number of journeys by car, particularly those of a short duration, need to be reduced. However, simply imposing 2 low traffic neighbourhoods is not the way to do this. Although some plans have been presented to residents, they have only shown the plus points to these schemes and have not allowed residents to see how they would actually affect their daily lives by having longer journeys to get around the road closures and having to use busier roads to access their premises. As far as I can see, there was no investigation into how implementing these would affect the roads around the area, all of which also have residential properties alongside them. We have all received a large number of emails on this subject this week, certainly more than we've ever received, even on the subject of bins. Some people have been in favour and have put forward valid arguments as to how their lives have been affected, but the majority that I've received have been against. They too have shown how both these schemes have impacted on their lives, whether it's having to now drive along the already busy A406 North Circular Road to leave or return to their properties for the Bow scheme, or along Alderman's Hill, Cannon Hill, etc. and Green Lanes for the Fox Lane scheme. A large number of those emails who were against have said, amongst other things, that they felt there was not enough consultation on either scheme. So whether the council believes that they did all they could to consult, it appears that they didn't reach everyone and more needs to be done. There have been stories from businesses unable to use electric vehicles due to the need for longer journeys. Care workers who can see fewer people each day as they need to keep backtracking along now busy roads. Or, as I heard from one resident, even having to go without lunch breaks and to work unpaid overtime in order to see everyone during their day. And elderly people who found the cost of a taxi to the shop or GP went up as they had to find longer, more congested routes to take. All of these need to use vehicles and have been negatively impacted. Yet again, with schemes being implemented, there doesn't appear to be a proper equality impact assessment. As Mrs. Justice Lang said recently, the elderly or disabled cannot reasonably be expected to cycle, walk or use public transport. It's all very well to say that these schemes will be monitored during the consultation period, but that may well be too long for some people. I'm pleased for those people who've seen a drop in emissions along their road. Perhaps thought should be given to those who recently moved into new properties right alongside the A406 Bowes Road and have seen their pollution levels increase, or those along roads going up to Southgate where traffic is often at a standstill, causing greater emissions. This really, to me, does seem to be yet another policy for the few, not the many. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, you have 10 minutes left of the minutes allocated for the opposition business. I will now ask the main opposition group to sum up and remind you that you have no more than 10 minutes. Thank you. Sorry, 5 minutes. My apologies.
Mr. Mayor, I summed up my speech earlier that we simply ask the Leader of the Council and the Deputy Leader of the Council to listen to our community. You cannot ignore the media protests, the petitions, the emails we've had night and day. We need to listen to our residents, the residents who put us here, and agree the recommendations tonight. The most awful thing that's come out of these schemes is the division within our borough. We have set neighbour against neighbour in certain circumstances. I've had residents too afraid to share their views on LTNs because of how badly this has been handled. It's time for us to recognise the pain and hurt that these LTNs have caused in our community, and we need to all agree the recommendations tonight in the OPB paper.
Thank you, Councillor. I now ask the majority group to respond to the recommendation in the opposition paper to outline if and how the matter will be progressed. Can I ask that you keep to 2 minutes, please? Sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought it was 5 minutes, I have to say. Is that not the case?
Is that the... I've got written down 2 minutes, but does he have 2 minutes or...
If the opposition has 5 minutes, I would have thought that I'd have 5 minutes, but if that's not the case, I will stick to 2 minutes. Can that be confirmed?
5 minutes then, please. Thank you, because
okay.
it needs to be fair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there we have it, Mr. Mayor. The Tory opposition refusing our offer of working together for the public good. And what you'll have noticed, Mr. Mayor, was there was not one viable alternative to LTNs within that whole within the speeches we've just heard. Even after hearing from my colleagues about public health and LTNs, the fact that hospital trusts are paying for LTNs and one of our schools is seeing an 18% drop in children being driven to school, the fight against climate change, which will have a hugely adverse effect on the future of children, we still get all of these excuses, denying official evidence and general misinformation from the opposition. They oppose us, they oppose the Mayor of London, they oppose their own government. I'm not really sure that they know what they stand for anymore, except for this desperate scramble for votes, you know, trying to manipulate emotions and stoke division amongst our community. Just picking up on a couple of the points, if I can, Mr. Mayor, before I wrap up. These were in our manifesto, whatever Councillor Anderson would like to say. These come under the quieter neighbourhood umbrella. We know about his first disastrous trial, and that his trial left the door open for more effective schemes, and that's what these LTNs are. We had reference to cash cows about the cameras. You heard, Mr. Mayor, I'd rather they had no signs if, you know, residents didn't break the law. We heard talk of a petition with 8,000 people. This is four different petitions with all overlapping signatures. We got attacked for actually choosing to bid for the money. We were told we shouldn't have bid for the money. Can you imagine, Mr. Mayor, if we hadn't bid for that money, what the Conservative opposition would have said? We were also, I mean, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee was mentioned. The only chaos I experienced of that was an opposition councillor at the end of it who had no idea what he was asking for. And we had Councillor De Silva arguing that, you know, pollution should still be contained on our residential roads, and also putting our children in danger, as I explained in my speech. And we also had Councillor Barry, I do agree with 20 miles an hour across the whole borough. That will slow down all the traffic, but it won't get rid of any of the traffic. So we'll just have a huge amount of slower moving traffic, but I will concede that that will make the borough safer. And a 20 mile an hour limit across the whole borough is something that I would like to push for in the future. So in response to opposition business, Mr. Mayor, we won't be removing the LTN trials. We'll continue. We'll follow our own climate action plan. We'll follow the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution that Councillor Band seems to want to completely ignore. And, you know, when more government funds come online, we're going to move into the east of the borough and beyond until the whole of Enfield is covered with trials, which will hopefully become permanent. We'll continue to learn lessons from previous LTNs as we move through. These are organic trials. We're going to continue to engage with residents. We're going to monitor the consultation and look at the feedback. We've already made a change to Fox Lane, and we're working with Haringey to dovetail their first LTN into ours, which could mean changes to the original phase 1 Bowes LTN. We'll continue our work on easing main roads from the vast majority of cars that are using them now. Like I said, we are not going to ignore that 10%. We are going to fight hard for that 10%. And just to finally say, Mr. Mayor, if these LTN trials are unsuccessful, then we'll simply try something else, because we're not going to stop fighting for the increased health and well-being of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Can the opposition confirm the position on the majority group response?
We vote against the majority group's response.
Jeremy?
And I want to take it to a vote.
You want to take it to a vote? Thank you, Councillor Laban. You've indicated your group's position. Is that the position of all Conservative councillors?
We all vote against the response to the OPB paper tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, can you confirm the position of your group?
We vote in favour of the majority group's response.
Thank you very much. Is there any Labour councillor that disagrees with what the whip has just said? I'll move on. Councillor Anderson, could you confirm the group position for Community First?
Yes, Community First will be voting against the majority party's position.
And that is the decision of all your group?
It is.
Thank you. On that basis, Mr. Mayor, the administration's position is confirmed, and you can move on to the next item of business.
Thank you, Jeremy. For the items 7 through to 11, reports to council, in line with the constitution, there is 60 minutes allocated. I will inform you when this time has lapsed. Item 7. We now move to item 7, empowering young Enfield. Children and young people plan. Can I ask for a member to move the report? You have 5 minutes. Councillor Jewell?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Presenting this plan to council with the hope that you will adopt it as our new children's plan, I want to thank all the officers that have been involved in developing it. It's been done through some of the most difficult of times, but I think they've done a fantastic job. If there was ever a more important time to have a strong, robust plan to assist us in supporting our young people and children, it must be now. After what has been a very difficult year, especially for children and young people, with some of them missing almost 12 months of education, let alone the impact upon the family units and peer relationships, coming out of this is going to be a very challenging time for everyone. Exams cancelled, predicted grades cancelled, back to school, then out of school, again, lockdowns of clubs, libraries and faith groups. It's been a year that has, if not dealt with right, will have some far-reaching impact on our young people. So supporting young Enfield by inspiring them and empowering them to get involved with decisions made is so important. This plan replaces our last children's plan that was approved in 2016. And whilst developing it, we made sure that the views of young people were interwoven throughout the plan. Over 900 children and young people were engaged. We also engaged with many members of our youth groups and services to find out what really mattered to them about living in Enfield. Throughout the document, you will see quotes from many young people, ranging from issues as where they live, where they go to school, where they socialise, what it's like for being a young person in Enfield, what concerns them about going into the world of work, and that transition into adulthood. Our plan will focus on 6 priorities, and these will benefit from the evidence gathered from children and young people within our Independent Poverty and Equality Commission. So I'll just run over the priorities. So priority 1, children and young people are empowered, included and respected. Including young people in our decision making as much as we can and listening to them. It's going to be really important. And, you know, with some of our groups that we've got, we're really working on it, although it's been a difficult year for that. But priority 2, children and young people can thrive through effective early help, good housing and accessible and inclusive services and public places. I mean, if you look at the documents there within the pack, but if you look at some of the quotes that young people have said to us throughout this procedure, they told us they would like more affordable access to leisure activities. They're happy with old flats being taken down and new ones being built up. Priority 3, children, young people and their families are supported to achieve the best possible health and well-being. They told us they like our parks. They like to be able to eat more healthily, and that's part of the programs that we're going to be doing throughout the summer period in educating and our summer universities and stuff like that. Priority 4, children and young people have access to an excellent education and ready to learn when they start school and leave with the skills they need for life and the world of work. So they enjoyed the libraries. They wanted to be taught life skills, budgeting, paying bills, mortgages and credit information. All the things now that when we left school, we didn't know nothing about, but they're much more in tune now, young people. Priority 5, children and young people are safe and protected from harm in all places and spaces. Young Enfield told us that although community patrols had led to fewer incidents, they would rather have proper police on the streets and more police on the streets. And you know, we work with them to see how we can progress that in the future. Care leavers getting more help through to independence. Priority 6, children and young people have an environmentally sustainable future. And I think it's really pertinent to the discussion we've just had. We've seen in the last couple of years how young people have got involved with the climate emergency.
Last minute, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Young Enfield told us they're concerned about levels of pollution. They would like more electric vehicles, more trees, etc. Young people have really grasped the concept of climate change and they want to see more change and quicker about it. There's so much more to this plan, but I'm getting a bit out of breath here, so I hope you agree. It's a really overarching strategy that puts children and young people at the heart of why we all come here to perform this role that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that seconded?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would you like to speak now or reserve your right to speak?
I'll speak now. Mr. Mayor, I welcome this report for empowering young people, as the previous report, as Councillor Jewell said, has lapsed. Over the years I've been on the council now, which is 27 years, I've seen many changes in children's services. And the first 8 years of my life on this council, it was 94 to 2002. You know, the funding for young people was cut by a Labour administration, then the Conservative administration increased it, and then we're back to cutting in 2010 till now. I'm pleased that the council is formally adopting a strategy for empowering young people. During my time as a cabinet member for Education and Children's Services, I visited all schools in Enfield to speak to and listen to young people's views and invited them into the Civic Centre, and they spoke to the directors and the chief executive at that time. I made sure that wherever possible their views were implemented. Incidentally, during that time I met a young Alessandro Giorgio who chaired a Children's Trust. He was a young man with strong views and expressed them excellently, so nothing has changed there at all. This document is full of promises and I have been told the funding is available to fulfil them. I sincerely hope this administration fulfils these promises that they have made to young people in the borough. I eagerly await to see the strategy put in place. Mr. Mayor, the Conservative group will be supporting and agreeing this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone from the main opposition, she's already, a minority group who wishes to speak? Councillor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just say, Councillor Levy was intended to speak, and obviously he's not here. We clearly do agree with much of what's in this report. It's very important that young people who I feel have been very neglected, and particularly during this pandemic and the terrible consequences that they have suffered, we really do need to put in plans to help and support them. And I think this is a welcome move, and very much endorse the comments that have been said both by Councillor Jewell and by Councillor Vince. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other member who wishes to speak on this item? You have 3 minutes. Councillor Bostas?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Across the world, the countries are taking steps to encourage young people to engage in maintaining and building up involved societies. It's a known fact that working on empowering young people will bring positive changes into their countries. As an Enfield Council, we are very excited with this 5-year plan, which will empower our young ones and will bring long-term positive changes into our borough. Youth creating solutions for meaningful participations can aim to increase the knowledge and skills of young people to actively engage at local and national level. This will bring solutions to social concerns, can provide safe, healthy, and confident communities with an economy that works for everyone. Empowering Young Enfield plan for 5 years will help to build relationships between youth organizations to creating wide-reaching networks that will benefit many others in long-term future. Our hard-working officers and all other participants, I'm sure, will share good practices and practical methods to make stronger the active participation of youth. Our Empowering Young Enfield plan will tackle so many of the challenges faced by our young people nowadays with through cooperation, peer learning, and sharing experiences across our borough. As a representative of the people of Enfield, I strongly support our Empowering Youth Enfield plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban.
Mr Mayor, as Councillor Vince said, we will be supporting this paper tonight, but there's two things I want to raise. There's very little mention of how successful the previous plan was. Indeed, if this plan, as per page 33, seeks to embed our commitment to celebrating the rich diversity, culture and heritage in our community and ensuring that all children and young people are treated with dignity, are protected and can express their views and feelings and wishes, were we not doing that before? Because as a councillor, I very much hope so. Normally with these plans, there is a paragraph in the paper accompanying the actual plan saying that we have made a good start with the old plan, but there is still work to do. But in this paper, the success of the previous plan is hardly mentioned. Can Councillor Jewell comment on whether he believes that the previous plans were successful or not? And also, with community patrols, I'm glad Councillor Jewell has mentioned those, because I don't believe they've been overly supported by the council, very much endorsed and supported by Scotland Yard, but I don't feel those who organise the community patrols feel they've always had the love and support from Enfield Council. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Susan Erbil.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, all. I would like to start by saying, sorry, just a moment. Sorry. Yeah, I'd like to start by saying, as one of the young councillors in our council, I'm fully supportive of this report. It is vital that we support, encourage, and enhance opportunities to our young people. This is evidence in the report that we have received in the pack. I'm very proud that young people in our borough have engaged and cooperated to develop the ambitious plan. This report is not only a word from adults, but it's most importantly a collection of young people's priorities. As the report notes, over 900 children took part and engaged in this report making. This shows respect and diligence being provided to our young people. We as a council need to support and keep young people in our borough as a paramount importance, as the priorities will help and shape all our futures, this being for health, education and environment. The report provides an inclusive and diverse plan for our young people and families. The report reflects on changes to how we have changed on how we started working in many years. The report is updated to include a range of ways and methods our younger generation are working and how they are accessible for support. For example, the use of internet and social media. The partnerships noted in the report enable young persons and families to cooperate and engage in various areas. The partnerships also enable young persons to champion their goals and aims and provide a solid ground to fulfill their ambitions. Once again, I praise the named partnerships and the council and the officers for their support. Our council has faced financial and COVID-19 difficulties in all areas of our council services. This has resulted in funding reductions, pressures. However, despite all the additional hurdles faced, the report aims to enhance and improve the quality of life for young persons. I would like to thank officers, all those who have engaged in this report, and Councillor Rick Jewell for his commitment and their commitment and dedication to providing the best. I'm fully supporting this and encourage everyone to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rai.
Thank you, Worship. I'm pleased to support this plan. I think it is disappointing that the previous plan ran out on the 31st of December and we're nearly at the end of January before the new plan is put before the Council for adoption. The review of the previous plan, as Councillor Leyburn said, is missing, and you would have expected a report on the success or otherwise of the previous 4-year plan. If you look at the financial implications section within the report, they are less than opaque and refer only to the budget of 2021 and the medium-term financial plan. So clearly what we have is presently supposed to be delivered within the existing resources. In terms of workforce implications, we have an answer of 0, other than training with regard to safeguarding and safer recruiting. This suggests that there will not be additional support for young people, which is clearly much needed in what is the COVID year. I'll take this opportunity to thank all staff who work in schools for the outstanding work they've done during this period to try and support children when they've not been able to be in school for no reason of themselves, but because of the national crisis. I would also like to take this opportunity to correct Councillor Jewell, who said that there were no predicted grades. Predicted grades are in fact offered each year and sent off to the different qualifying exam boards, whether exams are sat or not, because they're an important standardisation measure that the exam boards consider when actual results are delivered. So it's important that we're factually correct about these things. It would be reasonable to conclude that the report is high on aspiration, but unclear on how we will deliver this. I'll be interested to hear Councillor Jewell's response in due course. We're pleased to support the plan. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keyser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo what colleagues have said and thank officers, staff from schools and our young people that have pulled together this high flyer plan for our young people in Enfield. This children plan is a very important document, as this is an opportunity for Enfield Council to champion its support for our young people. I'm proud that over 900 children were consulted, as well as engagement with the youth groups. The importance of young people having a voice cannot be overemphasized. And so this plan will show the young people of our borough that Enfield is indeed listening to them. The data analysis shared in the report showcases the varying opportunities for our young people and indeed everyone in the borough. Mr. Mayor, this plan shares our vision and our ambition for our young people as a council, and this will champion priorities that will invest in our young people and empower them to achieve not just educationally, but socially, and all-inclusive aspects of living and working in Enfield. This plan champions the issues that are core to the well-being of our young people, including good housing, their health, their well-being, safeguarding, and of course, offer our young people excellent education and skills that they need for life. I commend this report and I ask that we all endorse this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Analu.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Empowering young people is, what else can I say about it? As you know, I just love young people, and because they are our future, we tend to forget that they are our future, they are future generation, and these are the people that I would like to look after me when I'm aged and I couldn't do anything more. So having this document is the best thing that I could think about. It ticked every aspect of life, you know, and just like echoing some of the words that have been said about thinking about the future, their mortgage and so forth. And it's nice to hear the young mayor talking about working with the police. You know, obviously that shows you that they've picked up and they are now they feel engaged, more engaged, because he goes out there to speak to the rest of the young people, and they see who, you know, it's like he is like a role model to the rest of the young people, and they know that the council is now working with them and empowering them. And you know, they talk about environment. Majority of them have been actually working with, you know, the shadowing the cabinet member for environment, and they will be very happy to hear about the LTN because they are really worried for their future. So I'm very, very happy that we've got this, and you know, it's going to be a better place for our young people, both housing, education, and especially employment. So definitely I support this document. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Does the mover wants to exercise right to reply? Rick, Councillor Jewell, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand corrected by Councillor Rye. What I was trying to put across was what a disastrous year this has been for everyone in general, but for young people, which is what I'm concerned about, young people in their education. That's what I was trying to get across there. What a disastrous 12 months it's been from, and what impact is that going to have on them as we go forward? Yeah, the last plan was a success. The Ofsted ratings confirm the success of that plan, and it's a shame it ran out on the 31st of December, and we've just got it in now, the new one. But doesn't mean that we've had no plan for the last 4 weeks or whatever. It's just the way that it's gone. But I'm just concerned really why Councillor Ryan, Councillor Laban didn't bring this up before during the extensive consultation process we've had for this document. It's been around for quite some months now that we've been passing it backwards and forwards, and those concerns weren't raised then, but then we didn't have an audience, I suppose, so this is the best time to bring it up. But that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Members are asked to approve the children and young people plan. I will pass to Jeremy for the results.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All three group whips have indicated that their groups will be voting for the recommendations in the report. So if any councillor of the council does not agree with their group whip's position, they need to say so now. On the basis of silence, Mr. Mayor, that report is unanimously agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to item 8, Enfield Council campaign for fairer funding. Can I ask for a member to move the report? You have 5 minutes. Councillor Çalışkan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report highlights the unprecedented financial pressure Enfield Council is under due to the impact of the pandemic, and the government has failed to stick to its promise to stand shoulder to shoulder with local government and to give councils the resources we need to meet the challenges of COVID-19. There was a clear promise made by the government. I know because I was on the webinars when the minister said it. And in good faith, this Labour administration led Enfield Council to rise to the challenge of COVID and support our residents. And in the spirit of coming together, there was cross-party support for the council's initiative. The council delivered 10,000 medical prescriptions, 40,000 food parcels, and helped our most vulnerable residents who were shielding. We acted quickly to support and protect residents when the government was too slow in responding to the crisis. Indeed, our council was one of the first to respond in such a comprehensive way, and we did so because government food packages didn't arrive, and when they did, the food was out of date. We stood up for care homes, for staff and residents when no one else was, and when government had abandoned our care sector. We fought day in and day out for better testing and worked with care homes daily to make sure there were stringent rules to stop the spread of the virus. It was Enfield Council that gave each care home a grant to purchase PPE so staff and our most vulnerable residents could be protected when the government forgot them. And we've provided counselling support services for frontline care workers who have been traumatised, witnessing death in numbers like never before. And Mr. Mayor, we swung into action to support our communities who are being financially hit. We've waived rents on council properties to help local businesses and community groups who are facing financial ruin. We've administered grants and business rates relief announced by the government faster than anywhere else in London to thousands of businesses locally. We expanded our financial support and debt prevention service to support families and in our borough facing financial hardship. and we've provided shelter for hundreds of rough sleepers during the pandemic. We've done much more, but Mr. Mayor, I only have 5 minutes. And the council and local government, this council and local government across the country, run by all political parties, have stepped up. We did it because it was the right thing to do, and we did it believing that the government would also do the right thing and help settle the extra cost. Instead of giving councils the funding we need, the Chancellor has imposed and proposed that the councils across the country hike up their council tax, forcing our residents and communities to pay a COVID tax. Following the parliamentary announcement earlier this month, I wrote to the Chancellor asking him to reconsider his decision and just fund us properly for the COVID costs. The Conservative opposition leader, Councillor Laban, was invited to co-sign the letter, and to be fair to the opposition, in the past they have signed fair funding letters, but on this occasion they declined. I can only assume the Conservative opposition support the government. I can only assume they support the government's COVID tax on Enfield residents. Mr. Mayor, in Enfield, the claimant count has more than doubled since last year, and many in our communities are suffering financially. To ask them to pay for the cost of COVID is unacceptable, an unacceptable ask by this government. The report tabled refers to local government core spending being increased by 4.5%. Let's be clear that the government themselves have acknowledged that increase in core spending assumes that the council tax bills will rise to 5% next year. The government is instructing councils to increase council tax to close the gap because they don't want to cover the cost of COVID. They're only covering 62% of the estimated financial impact of COVID for Enfield Council.
10 seconds, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, the report details some of the COVID pressures on our council and asks full council to endorse our efforts to work with our community groups and residents to seek a better, fairer funding settlement from government for Enfield residents.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that seconded?
Yes, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
McGuire, yes, you have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm formally seconding and reserving my right to speak, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone from the main opposition who wishes to speak? You have 5 minutes. Councillor Hockney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Right, well, let's start with some good news. I think we all certainly very much agree that we need to be addressing the issue of damping. This is an issue that we have seen both under the Blue government and under the Red government. However, the letter from the leaders conflated a range of different issues, including damping, COVID, funding, council tax. And Mr. Mayor, it does feel that the latest letter is a long line of communications during COVID, criticising the government. And at a time of COVID, it is actually a time to work together and come together. So working together when it's right. There will be times when this council needs to hold the government to account, but there's also many times where this government needs to be praising this government for the amount of funding that it's been putting into our area. When we talk about tax, one of the very important things that we need to remember is we're under devolved administration. So we have Mayor Khan, and Mayor Khan is proposing to increase GLA tax on Enfield Borough residents by 10%. Where are the letters from the leader criticising those proposed increasings? The letter also talks about funding costs, but the council has over £1 billion to spend each and every year, and that is more than it had 5 years ago. The government has been stepping in to address costs, but it seems to be the council, in terms of how it measures costs, is both expenditure and losses as one and the same. We keep talking about the government is forcing the local authorities to increase tax by 5%. Well, no, it's us as councillors that make the decisions in terms of our taxation rates. And an LGC survey has showed that Labour authorities are proposing to increase the 5%, 83% of those councils are, compared to 41% of Conservative councils. That is the difference between Labour and Conservative councils. There seems to be a mixture of messaging about furlough, and furlough should be absolutely praised up. It is one of the most generous schemes in the world. It has protected thousands upon thousands of jobs in the Enfield borough and made sure that families have an income to put food on the table and pay bills. There doesn't seem to be the recognition that the government stepped in with tens of millions of pounds for the costs of COVID, £9 million for homelessness, the most of any authority in England, 6.3 million.
1 minute.
Yeah, 6.3 million pounds council tax, 1.1 million pounds to help funding vulnerable children and families with heating. Business rates, holiday grants, loans has been a fundamental flaw put under the economy thanks to the Conservative government. We hear about this web page, but there's no costings on it. There's no details, no clarity. And we've already seen that 3 strategies from this council have cost the taxpayer over £100,000. So let's take a step back and reflect, and let's focus on one issue, addressing the public health damping, rather than these political attacks that the administration keeps making on the government. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone from the minority opposition who wishes to speak? You have 3 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I will speak. I mean, the issue is, look, we support what's been said in this paper. There is no doubt, and this has been like a Groundhog Day. Every year we have the same problem, whereby we're raising the inequality which is facing this borough, and it's never addressed. And it's a stark issue, as is raised in this report, the money per head we get, particularly in public health. We're at a severe disadvantage from other boroughs, and the difficulty is, I listen to what Councillor Hockney says, and I hear his point about councils spending, but the reality of it is nonetheless that we have lost a substantial £193 million from central government over a decade, and given that government support and other grant support makes up around 82 or 84% of our funding, and council tax makes up about 10% of that, and there's a little bit extra for business rates. Really, if you lose that amount of money, you can never make it up from local increases. And indeed, if you don't increase your local tax, then effectively you're going to have even further cuts, and it is a real problem, and it's an unfair impact upon local residents, because it's a regressive tax. It really should go to those who can afford to pay, and central government funding really does need to be reappraised and refocused, and it really is not satisfactory. It's true we're in a pandemic, and indeed there is lots of things going on, and we don't I mean, let's put that aside. We understand the challenges that faces. It doesn't change the unfair funding arrangements which are affecting councils, and Enfield is one of those which is deeply affected, and so it's completely right that we lobby in this manner, and we should try and hope, perhaps against the experience, that things will change. But clearly, as it stands, Enfield residents are getting pretty much a raw deal, and that isn't good. And we should all hope that we can try and put in extra effort to get some change. And maybe in a post-pandemic age, maybe there will be a need to reappraise the entire funding model. Councillor. But that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, just switching on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the campaign for fairer funding for Enfield, it has made clear that the huge pressures and massive funding cuts make it harder for Enfield Council and all our communities. Funding cuts and rising demand for services will suffer as a result of further funding cuts for Enfield that will impact on all the services for our residents. Due to the cut to local authorities over the last 10 years, Enfield Council has been forced to find 193 million to keep our services running. It's so wrong that on the 25th of November, in a statement to Parliament, it was proposed that council tax could increase by 5%. We all know that with this usual attack on local councils, that a council tax increase will place the burden unfairly on our residents and communities, making it increasingly difficult for families who are already struggling to make ends meet. Deprivation describes the lack of material benefits such as a job, income, decent home and education is what we should prevent from happening with the funding needed to support all our residents and communities in Enfield. With this fair funding review, there's no escaping the inadequacy and of the resources they are now distributing during this pandemic crisis. The government has been urged to reconsider this decision and take action to fund councils fully for the costs incurred during the pandemic to ensure Enfield residents are not punished at a time when they need support the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban.
Mr. Mayor, like my colleague Councillor Hockney said, we do believe in fairer funding when it comes to public health. I'd be very happy to do cross-party work, but I just get sent a letter that seems so unprofessional when we're asking someone to give us more money. Mr. Mayor, people will always have my support for the people of Enfield. And the Conservative group has always and will always be against damping. However, this is a Labour political campaign on the taxpayer. The Labour Party in Enfield must be very poor if it needs the taxpayer to subsidise its campaigns. I note that in the report it says there doesn't have any legal implications, this webpage or this letter. However, I also know that Enfield Council was written to this week from Luke Hall MP, the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government, asking that he took the opportunity to write to remind the leader of the council and the council in general of the requirement for local authorities to have regard to the provisions in the Code of Recommended Practice on Local Authority Publicity. Specifically, he reminded Councillor Callisgang of paragraphs 15 to 25 of the Code to observe the principles of objectivity and even-handedness, which requires local authority publicity and work to be politically impartial and present matters fairly. This letter doesn't deliver that, and many of the communications this year have not delivered that, and that is why she's received this letter. You can count on our support for fairer funding. What we get in terms of public health isn't good enough. It never has been under a blue government or under a red. But having a web page campaigning along these lines is a Labour council campaigning using taxpayers' money, and I will not support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cazimoğlu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm truly heartened to see the opposition members refer to disabled and vulnerable residents this evening so much in their speeches. As misguided as they were, I hope their concern extends to asking their government to properly fund services which these very same residents actually rely on, and I hope they'll be joining us in accepting that Enfield's funding allocation is grossly unfair and vote in favour of this report. But having just listened to the leader of the opposition, I doubt that very much. So imagine, Mr. Mayor, 10 years of Tory austerity, 10 years of Tory austerity, Adult social care facing a massive gap and a one-year deal, providing absolutely no certainty. Social care desperately needs to be able to plan for beyond the next 12 months. This makes it difficult for the NHS and local government to invest jointly in integrated services aimed at improving health outcomes, reducing health inequalities, and increasing the resilience and well-being of our communities. The precept is not a sustainable solution either. This is a continuation of the sticking plaster approach to funding adult social care. The Prime Minister promised to fix social care in July 2019, and before him, Theresa May. Everyone connected to social care is frustrated by the lack of progress on this crucial issue. There must be no further delays to the process of reform. Indeed, this pandemic has made the issue even more urgent. The pandemic has demonstrated to the public the immense value of adult social care to lead the life they want to lead, and it is a dereliction of duty that this government, in its spending review and funding for local government, has not recognised the crucial role it plays. The pandemic has also demonstrated the enormous contribution, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Neville? Councillor Neville?
Mr. Mayor.
Do you wish to speak?
Mr. Mayor, yes, sorry, I beg your pardon. Having difficulties there switching on. Mr. Mayor, yes, very briefly, I want to endorse all of what Councillor Hockney said in his speech. It's quite clear that I, as a former leader, and as Councillor Taylor will know, have joined with him on at least two occasions in supporting the council's attempts to get fairer funding over the damping process and also fairer funding for public health. That is an entirely different issue for effectively using what might be called the proverbial begging bowl for something where the government have given an undertaking. I think we're all aware of that, to actually reimburse local authorities for what they spend, legitimate expenditure, of course. And any government would be irresponsible if it just wrote a blank check that enabled people to just spend willy-nilly, regardless of any kind of audit or requirement for receipts. No company would do that with an expenses account. Why should the government do it with public money being spent by other public authorities? So it's entirely right and reasonable that it should require proper audited accounts in order to repay the councillors money that they legitimately incur for COVID-related matters within the guidance that's been issued by the government. Now, the letter, of course, that went to the Chancellor was going beyond that. It's virtually saying, yes, we've done all this, and no one's saying you didn't. Yes, you did. But these decisions were taken against a background that you do have, at the end of the day, a finite budget. And people have to operate within finite budgets.
Last minute, Councillor.
It's a hard life, Mr. Mayor. We all have to do it at home. We all have to do it in our businesses, and councils have to do it too. And sometimes councils only learn the hard way. And I don't want to see that happen to Enfield, because the borough residents will suffer as a result of it. But there is a real reality here that this was never going to be a blank check, and it should have never been understood to be a blank check. And to the extent that it has been treated so, you cannot be surprised if the government, against the present background of the amount of debt that it has had to incur in order to deal adequately with the COVID situation across the nation, should be expected to go further. Mr. Mayor, I therefore have to oppose.
Thank you. Councillor McQuire.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, we did not treat the government's promise as a blank cheque. We did not spend willy-nilly. We spent legitimate amounts of money to help our residents stay at home and stay safe, protect themselves in the NHS, and the leader has detailed all the extensive work and assistance and help we gave to our residents. We did that in the belief, in the trust that the government would honour their pledge. And yes, Councillor Hockney, I do hold the government to account now, not sometime in the future, but now. A promise made should be a promise kept. The difference between Labour and Conservative councils is that we are responsive to our residents' needs. Conservatives always want to count money and not respond to what the residents need. We've done our best. We are not going to take a step back. Both Councillor Hockney and Councillor Bann spoke about public health. Well, let's just look at the public health issue. Scandalously low level of public health allocation that we receive compared to neighbouring boroughs. Rich Westminster, for example, received 2.5 times more per head than Enfield. 2.5 times, Mr. Mayor. Fairer funding, Mr. Mayor, is a matter of political will. And we've heard from the leader how hard everybody has worked in this borough to help people and businesses during the pandemic. Officers have worked hard throughout the whole period. And they've worked hard over the past couple of years to bring our budget into a resilient and sustainable position so that we could progress with some degree of equilibrium. It's very disappointing that the opposition won't sign the letter. It's very disappointing that they won't stick up for Enfield when we need it most. We're facing this position following all the cuts that have already been discussed, and in the face of damping, and in the face of increased pressures from adult social care, children's services, homelessness, temporary accommodation. We now have thousands of residents on furlough. We have jobs lost. We have businesses closed. An uncertain future awaits them all. Local small businesses are trying to tread water. And despite the promises to fund the cuts, the government turns round and tells councils, yeah, have some more money, but you have to raise it through local taxation. To put that in context, Mr. Mayor, the increase in core funding announced by the government, of that increase, 87% of it has to be raised through council tax. We are faced with no choice. What I would call that is disingenuous. That's the polite word for it, Mr. Mayor. We can see that there is no political will there. You know, in times of adversity...
Time, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Political will can move mountains. All we ask is for our fair share. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith. Councillor, you are on mute. Can you unmute yourself, Councillor?
Sorry, can you hear me now, Mr. Mayor? Yeah, sorry about that. This report unhelpfully amalgamates two issues, as colleagues have said. Firstly, the cross-party campaign for fairer funding for Enfield, particularly in relation to public health, which the opposition fully supports. And secondly, the request by the council to the government for further funding to cover the cost of COVID-19. The report seeks council approval to the recent letter from the leader to the Chancellor requesting additional financial support. And as well, it also seeks permission to set up a council webpage to enable residents to lobby for this. We cannot support either proposal, but since I only have limited time available tonight, I'd like to deal with the request for further C19 funding from government. The council estimates the overall financial impact of the COVID outbreak to be almost 65 million this year, a lot of money. The government has responded by providing 35 million of direct funding to date and by giving permission to the council to run a collection fund deficit worth over 19 million to help offset the legitimate costs that the council has incurred. According to the recent Q2 revenue monitoring report, the council has generated sufficient income savings this year to close the forecast deficit, including the impact of COVID, to under £500,000 a year, which in the context of annual expenditure of well over £1 billion a year is not a large sum in the scheme of things. The opposition wonders, therefore, why the administration is seeking further help from government when it seems its projected financial position is, at least at the moment, in balance. In our view, it's misleading for the leader of the council to go on a politically inspired shroud-waving expedition, as she did in her letter to the Chancellor. The reality is that the government has been very generous to Enfield so far, and a recognition by the administration of this fact will be very welcome, though I suspect I will have to wait a rather long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Well, I think colleagues have summed up the position admirably, and you know, as Councillor Smith just said, £35 million has been given by the government to this council to help deal with the genuine costs of COVID. What is completely unacceptable for residents of Enfield is for this to be used as a political football by the administration, as they're doing, to whip up their website and cause all sorts of anxiety in a time when people are already under significant pressure. The government has put its arms around the nation financially and with the health response to this terrible crisis that we find ourselves in. We've got one of the most generous schemes in the country, and this council has benefited from the government schemes here significantly, and as Councillor Smith just said, to the tune of £35 million. Councillor Maguire describes it as disappointing that the Conservatives haven't signed their letter to the Chancellor, which is politically motivated and unfair in what it is suggesting. She talks about having a resilient budget. Well, I mean, it's laughable. This council has borrowed and spent money, and it's completely out of control financially, and which is why it's trying to use the coronavirus pandemic as a chance to ask for more money. And you know, Enfield has done well from the government. The government has done well to support so many people, so many businesses through the furlough scheme, through the grant schemes. Money,
last minute, Councillor.
So much money has been given by this generous government to support people, and I find it's just intolerable that this report has even been bought, quite frankly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Çalışkan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And look, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Secretary told council leaders, and I quote, "The government will do whatever it takes, whatever is necessary to support the efforts." This report is simple. Enfield Council just wants the money that we were promised. And instead of supporting it, what we've heard from Councillor Ban is that she supports a junior Tory minister who's had a hissy fit because Enfield Council has been effectively calling out the government's lies. Clearly, we've rattled them, Mr. Mayor. Look, the council will continue to fight for a better deal for Enfield residents. We'll do it without cross-party support if necessary. What I really don't understand, Mr. Mayor, is why Councillor Ban and Enfield Conservatives won't support the Conservative leader of the LGA, who himself is calling on the government to meet the costs that have fallen on local councils. And Mr. Mayor, Councillor Hockley knows too well that the government has assumed that all local authorities will increase council tax by almost 5%. And yes, the council has received some COVID grant funding, but it only covers 62% of the estimated financial impact. That is not generous. Mr. Mayor, this report sets out Enfield Council's position that we're calling on the government to not impose a COVID tax on our residents and instead give us the money they promised. It's about fair funding, and I simply don't understand why the Tories have got a problem with this.
Thank you, Councillor. Does the mover members are asked to approve the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The majority group, the three group whips have indicated how each group will vote as follows. The majority group has indicated they will be voting for the report. So if any member of the Labour group does not agree with that, they need to say so now. The majority opposition group have indicated they will be voting against. So if there's any member of the Conservative group that does not agree that they are voting against, they need to say so now. And the minority opposition group has indicated they will be voting for the recommendations in the report. So any member of the Community First group that does not agree with that statement needs to say so now. But given that there have been no indications, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that the recommendations in the report have been agreed.
Thank you, Jeremy. We now move on to item 9, Council Tax Support Scheme for 2021-2022. Can I ask a member to move the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You have 5 minutes, Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, each year we have to consider whether to revise or replace our council tax support scheme. That's the scheme that helps our poorest, most vulnerable residents to pay their council tax. Since 2013, we funded our own scheme following the government abolishing the National Council Tax Benefit Scheme. Last year, we agreed some changes to the scheme, but I'm pleased to say that we are retaining that scheme, including the changes that we made last year, and that is summarised at Appendix A. We're also retaining the list of exempted or protected groups from war widows to care leavers who will pay no council tax. And again, that list is set out as Appendix A. Members will recall that last year we reduced the minimum amount that working age households had to pay from 26.5% down to 24.5%. That reduced the council tax payable for more than 12,000 households living on the basic needs allowance, residents who have the lowest income in the borough, and that figure remains. The maximum earned income for universal credit claimants to receive council tax support will be set at £1,100 net per month. The report asks council to delegate responsibility to make minor necessary changes to either correct errors or to align with changes in the regulations on which the scheme is based. There are also some administrative changes in paragraph 16 to improve service delivery. We're also proposing that the transitional arrangements that we put in place last year for those about to go off the scheme, i.e. so there was no cliff edge, that arrangement will remain for this year with half the support received last year, i.e. 25% help of the difference. This covers about 122 residents at a cost of £40,000, which is funded from the existing council tax hardship scheme. Behind this scheme, Mr. Mayor, is a story of where Enfield sits amongst London boroughs and how our residents have been affected economically by COVID. I reported this time last year that the scheme provided support to more than 35,500 households, made up of 8,500 pensioners, pension age households, and 27,250 working age households. We have the highest number of claimants in any of the London boroughs. During the course of the past year, the number of claimants increased by nearly 1,400, adding £2.3 million to the cost. The government did provide additional hardship funding of £6.2 million, the majority of which has been awarded as hardship payments of up to £250 for eligible council taxpayers. That's more than 250,000 people. That also helped with our collection performance. This coming year, we estimate it will cost an additional £6.6 million based on the government's predicted unemployment levels when the furlough scheme ends in April. There are many of our residents furloughed and their future is very uncertain. We estimate the scheme will deliver £40 million in reductions to more than 40,000 working age and pensioner households. We are determined to maintain that support to help our residents and to help them get back on their feet. We also have a discretionary council tax hardship scheme where households facing temporary exceptional financial difficulties can apply for help with their council tax. Mr. Mayor, our scheme helps households with their council tax, households with young people or vulnerable adults to maintain council tax payments and avoid arrears. It will all roll into part of our debt and income strategy that we're working on. Supporting low-income households to help avoid debt has a positive impact on their physical and mental health and well-being. And I think it's important that we continue to support those residents, and therefore I move the scheme. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that seconded?
It's seconded, Mr. Mayor. And can I speak now on the subject?
Please do so, yes.
Thank you. As Councillor McQuire has just reported, this is a excellent report which I commend to everyone. You know, for the government to increase council tax rise now is clearly wrong. It's just making the pandemic worse for many citizens. But even with reduced funding, we, the Labour Council, are doing our best to support everyone. As a local councillor whose ward contains some of the most deprived in our borough, I do speak to many with problems. And they are grateful for the support they get from the furlough scheme, but more so from this council that that clearly shows that we care about people. I would urge councillors to inform any of their residents that help is available through the council tax hardship scheme. This is a absolutely superb scheme that we should all take advantage of. We should be proud of it because it's entirely discretionary. But it's what a decent Labour council like Enfield is doing. Currently, we have over £1,000 set aside for it, and it will go up. And even if those who are not that deprived, no one is immune from this pandemic. So we will help anyone if they have a reasonable claim. Being a good citizen, I only venture out to do food shopping, and I sort of have socially distanced, bumped into staff from my favourite coffee shop and my local department store. Now, most of these workers are on minimum wage, so the furlough scheme is welcomed by them, and the council tax support scheme really does help. I'm proud that we're doing our bit. They, even though they're furloughed, they don't earn as much money as they would normally do. So every single help they get really does benefit them. So I would recommend this report. If anyone hasn't read,
1 minute left, Councillor.
Thank you. Right. If anyone hasn't read the report, here are some highlights for residents and citizens viewing. The council tax support is an essential part of the council's help for low-income households impacted by COVID-19, either through unemployment, reduction in income, and the furlough scheme. There are an increasing number of residents moving from housing benefit to universal credit, as changes in circumstances trigger this transfer. This will impact on the overall cost of council tax support, but we will continue that support as much as possible. Council tax support helps households with young people or vulnerable adults to maintain council tax and avoid council tax arrears. Now, those arrears are, can be actually sort of devastating to residents, but at least we are protecting them. Council tax support has a positive impact on the general public's physical and mental health, and will be by supporting low-income households and helping avoid debt. I commend this report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. That brings us to the end of this, the allocated time on this item. And Item number 12.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a procedural motion.
Is that seconded?
I haven't moved the motion yet.
I see. Jeremy?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have two people that have indicated they'd like to move procedural motions. The first one received by officers was Councillor Glynis Vince, but Councillor Glynis Vince's motion was in relation to changing order of business and then moving the order of motions. So as that was notified to officers first, you should invite Councillor Vince to do that first.
Sure. Thank you, Jeremy. Councillor Vince?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to ask that when we get to motions, could we change the order of business and take 13.2 first, bearing in mind yesterday was Holocaust Day?
If I can, Mr. Chairman, before you ask for a seconder on that, the next order of business on the agenda is council questions. So we need a procedural motion to move to motion ahead of questions.
So can
I say what our procedural motion would be then in light of what Councillor Vince has just said?
I think that would be helpful.
Sure.
Yep. Okay, so we would like to move so that motions are taken now. Our order was going to be 13.1 followed by 13.14, and then I don't think we'd have time for any more, but in light of Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday, we would accept taking that motion above our two motions, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
If for the sake of completeness, Mayor, and to move the meeting on as we are virtual, it seems to me that the two group whips of the main parties are in agreement.
Yes.
If Councillor Anderson is also in agreement, we could just simply move on to motions and deal with 13.2 first, and then 13.1, and then 13.14.
Councillor Anderson?
Yes,
are you happy with that?
Yeah,
agreed.
Agreed.
I think we can take that as unanimous agreement and proceed to motion 13.2.
13.2. Okay. Motion 1. Okay. In the name of Councillor John Laban, would like to move the motion. You have 5 minutes, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, in the week of Holocaust Memorial Day, I want our council to reaffirm its adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards the Jewish community, institution and religious facilities. I think it is important each year at this time that we reaffirm our commitment to stamping out anti-Semitism. Holocaust Memorial Day is held on the day commemorating the liberation of Auschwitz. During my history studies, I visited a concentration camp, and the sights I saw have never left me. The spectacles, the teddy bears for the children, the hair shaved off women before they could go to their deaths. We have a duty as survivors of the Holocaust, unfortunately pass on. It is the duty of everyone to continue the battle to stamp out anti-Semitism and call it out whenever we see it. I hope Enfield Council and all the Chamber come together and reaffirm its adoption to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that seconded?
I'm happy to second.
Yes,
and
seconded.
Okay, Councillor, would you like to speak now, or Councillor Day, or do you want to reserve your right?
I reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you. Main office, Councillor Çalışkan, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'm happy to take this motion this evening. Holocaust Memorial Day was once again marked by Enfield Council this year with an online event rather than at the Dugdale Centre, which is normally where we hold the event. And let me take this opportunity to thank everyone involved in organising the online event. Hundreds joined last night, which is fantastic. Mr. Mayor, the theme of this year's event, Be the Light in the Darkness, is incredibly poignant. It reminds us that in the darkness that was the Holocaust, the light provided by people, their kindness, the hope, allowed that dark period in history to pass. It's also a theme that's incredibly apt right now because we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic where so many people are mourning loved ones who've lost their lives. But of course, Holocaust Memorial Day is an opportunity for us to reflect on horrors, the horrors of history and the darkest times that haunts all of us. It's an opportunity for us to remember and to work so that we never forget. To not forget the Holocaust, but also to remember all those across the world who are facing similar oppression and where human suffering exists. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to support this motion. I endorse comments made by other members on the importance of fighting anti-Semitism. I'm proud that this local authority has already adopted the HRA definition in its full definition. I believe I proposed the motion and it was unanimously agreed by full council. And we will as a local authority continue to mark Holocaust Memorial Day and do everything we can to ensure that our community remembers as it should.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone from the minority opposition who wishes to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll say a few words about this. I'm very proud and humbled by the council adopted this particular definition, and it's a tribute to everyone on the council who have done so. I was very much instrumental back in 2001 when we held the first Holocaust Memorial Day event in the council, and I'm glad to see every single year it has continued in that way, and last night was no exception. However difficult it was given the pandemic, but nonetheless the council did put on a very exceptional event, albeit online. It is clearly the Holocaust is, for me personally and my family, also something that is very personal. I'm also, in my spare time, I'm a bit of a genealogist, and I discovered distant family who were unfortunately murdered in Auschwitz. And that obviously resonates with many people's experiences, and it was a very tragic and very difficult situation and circumstance that we've had to live through, and indeed, of course, continue today with the terrible events which continue on in this world. I clearly do endorse this motion, and I'd recommend also to members who are particularly interested in the darkest, deepest hours of challenge in the Holocaust. A man called Viktor Frankl wrote a very interesting book called Man's Search for Meaning about his experiences. He was a psychologist, and he lost his family in there, but he found the search for meaning being the driving force for many people who survived, and it's a very profound book. It's a short book, but it's a very meaningful book, and I would recommend to members, if they haven't read it, to perhaps give it consideration. But I want to again thank the council for the work that they have continued to do in this way. Thank all members equally for their support, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ergin Erbil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am honoured to speak on this item, and I would like to reaffirm everything that my colleagues have said before me. I'd like to reaffirm our collective stance against prejudice of any kind, and as Councillor Chalishkan has said, we continue to work to be the light in the darkness. This stance, being the light against the darkness, is more important now than it has ever been. With the rise of fascism and rise of far-right views across the world, we must remember the consequences of such hate. We remember the victims of the Holocaust and the victims of the genocides that have taken place throughout our history. From the victims of Auschwitz to the victims of the Armenian genocide, which took place more than 100 years ago, we will continue to be the light in the darkness. Thank you once again, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Alexandru?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to mention Prince Charles's speech that he made last year. The Holocaust must never be allowed to become simply a fact of history. We must never cease to be appalled nor moved by the testimony of those who lived through it. Their experience must always educate and guide and warn us. The lessons of the Holocaust are searingly relevant to this day. 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, hatred and intolerance still lurk in the human heart, still tell new lies, adopt new guises, and still seek new victims. All too often, language is used which turns disagreement into dehumanization. Words are used as badges of shame to mark others as enemies, to brand those who are different as somewhat deviant. All too often, virtue seems to be sought through verbal violence. All too often, real violence ensues and acts of unspeakable cruelty and still perpetrated around the world against people for reasons of their religion, their race, or their beliefs. And I'd like to mention Princess Alice, the mother of Prince Philip, who saved an entire family in Greece by hiding them in her residence. Let's not forget the majority of Greece's 80,000 Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Prince Philip said his mother had not mentioned the Cohen family because she would have considered her actions to be perfectly natural human reaction to fellow beings in distress. A report by the Community Security Trust in December 2020 found that anti-Semitic incidents at university campuses have increased. This evil and hatred still persists today. I would like to finish by quoting Sir Nicholas Winton, who rescued 700 Jewish children from Nazi-occupied Europe. Don't be content in your life just to do no wrong. Be prepared every day to try and do some good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chiba?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to add my support with so many other members to fully support this motion. I think it's just so important for us to mark Holocaust Memorial Day and think about what it means, because we must stop these awful events being repeated by future generations. And that's why I think it's just so incredibly important that the Holocaust is taught in schools so that children understand and it becomes a full part of the history curriculum. We need children to understand the way in which prejudice and racism can lead to the most appalling actions. When I was at university, I was lucky enough to be taught by a really great Jewish historian called Professor Jonathan Steinberg. He'd lost many members of his family in Auschwitz, and he told me that he had become a historian to try and understand how such an awful thing had happened. And his expertise on the subject was so great that he was called upon many times to be an expert witness in Nazi war criminal trials. And he said something to me that has really stayed with me over the years. He said that during the course of those trials, he found it really difficult to know where the blame stopped, because he said it's really easy to know where the blame is when someone has clearly played a huge part in an atrocity. But what about all the people who just turn a blind eye to what's going on, or the people who choose not to speak out? Because he said a tragedy like the Holocaust only happens because society allows it to happen and collectively turns a blind eye. And that's why it's so important for us to mark this day and to think about what it means, because none of us must turn a blind eye, and we must all support this fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair. Last night, we commemorated this year's theme, Be the Light. I'm sure that you would all agree that it was a unique and inspiring piece of work that captures the spirit of Holocaust Memorial Day really well, and will stand as an educational resource for people to engage with in the future, as well as a fine centerpiece for this year's event. I'm particularly pleased by how the film focused so well on Enfield as a place that should celebrate its history of diversity and humility. Holocaust Memorial Day is not only about remembering past genocide and honoring those that died, but also an opportunity to learn lessons from the past through the stories of those we shared. And listening to the stories shared last night, we are reminded of humanity and that we should, as counselors, be the light that shines in our community. So I support this and ask that everyone today should be a light in the darkness that we face in the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Analu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor
Analu,
Analu,
sorry.
please. Yeah, Analu, sorry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday was a very, very sad day for me, because as a human being who feels for everybody, I just try to think about how so much millions can be murdered by same human being. And it's not something that can ever be forgotten, because the only thing that we owe these people is to remember them always. However, it's very unfortunate that the same thing is still happening up till today. We can go we can go as far back as, or as early as in Rwanda, even in Nigeria, over 3 million in 1970, between 66 and 70. So I just wonder why we are created by one God, and yet we seem to see think that we are different from one another. I never think there's any superiority between human beings. We are all the same. However, the climate may change the color and we are black, but I still believe that the same blood runs in our veins. So for the only thing that we can do is to continue to mark this day. Holocaust Memorial Day should be remembered at all time, and remember not only for the Jews, for also all the other countries where it's happening. But when are we going to learn? If we don't say it, and if we don't mention it, and if we don't teach our children and remind them what this type of things could do to others, then we will forget, then we will never change. So I agree definitely that we need to make sure that in the school, our young people are reminded and taught what hatred could cause to humans who are supposed to be the same. So I support this motion, and I'm glad that we celebrated yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, you've missed off Councillor Day. He was due to speak. He
He's
reserved
next.
his right. He reserved his right to.
He's next. He's on my list, and he's next person to speak. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I've just been very humble to listen to the comments from colleagues and fully support Councillor Laban's motion, and was pleased to be able to second it. I remember a trip to Dachau, the concentration camp just outside Munich, which I went on which I had a visit to some years ago now. But the the memories of what I saw there, of what was pictured and how terrible the atrocities were that were committed against the Jewish people, it just took my breath away. Fully support the council making this motion, and I'm really glad that we're doing this cross-party and with full support of councillors from across the political divisions. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Laban. Councillor Laban, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say thank you to every party and every councillor for supporting this motion tonight. We can take from this, but at least on this very important issue, that our council can be the light in the darkness to stamp out anti-Semitism forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will pass to Jeremy Chambers for the vote now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an indication from all 3 group whips that their groups will be voting in support of this motion. If that is not the case, please can any councillor say so now? That motion is agreed, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the meeting. Any reports not yet considered will be put all together without any debate, with a statement from both leaders of the opposition parties. If they would like to have vote for or against adoption of this report. I will now pass it on to Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll go to Councillor Laban first. If you could indicate how you would have voted on the outstanding reports.
On we've got the council tax and business rate collection fund, we'd have voted against, and designation of chief finance officer, we would have agreed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barry.
Council tax support scheme, we would have voted against. Council tax business rate collection fund, we would have supported, and the item 11, we would have abstained.
Thank you very much. I can hand back to you now, Mr. Mayor, to close the meeting.
Thank you very much for all of your very productive contribution. We are all, at the end of the day, want a better Enfield and serve better to our residents. At the end of the day, the residents chose us and sent us here to serve on for them. So thank you, all the parties and participants. The intention is positive and good. We have differences in politics, but in heart, we all want a better Enfield, especially now with pandemic. We are going through very hard times. Small businesses, large businesses, young people, old people, poor people, rich people, doesn't really make any difference. We are all in the same boat, and we need to support one another and stand and by each other, just to make sure we pass these hard times and hopefully the normal times comes back again. Once again, I would really like to thank all the NHS people, workers and the nurses and the doctors, and would like to say my condolences for the 2 councillors passed away, to their families and friends, and hope to see you on the next council meeting. And please stay safe and be safe. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.